Hi, I'm Fred Thompson, founder and CEO of Thirst. Welcome to the first ever L&D Unleashed. Whether you're tuning in live or catching up later, we are so glad that you're here. So please say hi in the comments, let us know where you're joining from, or just drop us a thumbs up. This moment marks something important. This isn't just another learning event. It's a line in the sand. It's a fresh start for L&D teams who've had to figure things out the hard way, with limited time, stretched resources, and big expectations. You've stayed agile, scrappy, and relentlessly focused on people, even when the system around you wasn't built for that. L&D Unleashed is about changing that system. It's about rethinking how to identify, build, and grow skills, and unleashing learning that's faster, smarter, and more impactful. Because let's be honest, the skills gap isn't a future problem. It's happening right now. And if we're relying on old tools, old mindsets, or outdated training models, we're already behind. And that's not your fault. It's the environment we've all been handed. But that's exactly why we're here, to rewrite it. We recently published our State of L&D for SMEs Report 2025. And you can get a copy of the full report by scanning on the QR code on the screen right now. And it's clear teams know what needs to change. They just need the tools, the support, and the headspace to make it happen. Here's what L&D leaders told us when asked about their biggest challenges in addressing the skills gap. 30% said conducting a proper skills analysis was their number one blocker. 25% said delivering the right training in time. Another 25% said access to tools and resources. And the final 20% said they're struggling to measure any meaningful impact. So it's not about awareness. It's about execution at speed and scale. But that's tough when you're relying on, spreadsheets, static courses, clunky systems that just don't evolve with your people. So what's broken? Let's call it what it is. Traditional learning systems were built for a world that no longer exists. A world where change was slow, roles were rigid, and training was something you kind of did once a year. But now, roles shift in weeks, skills expire in months, and employees expect more than just one-size-fits-all courses. Yet many L&D teams are trying to run gap analysis manually, chasing down feedback via email, and hoping completion rates equals capability. And that's not scalable. And it's not helping people grow. What's broken isn't your effort. It's the infrastructure around you. So what is possible? What if L&D looked different? What if your platform could show you in real time where skills were missing and recommend tailored learning experiences to close the gap immediately? What if your team had a dynamic living skills matrix mapping both what the people can do now and what they'll need to do next? What if AI wasn't just a buzzword, but a genuine assistant saving you time on content creation, learner personalization, and reporting? The best teams aren't trying to be perfect. They're trying to be faster, smarter, more adaptive. And they're doing it by combining great people with modern AI-assistive tools built for this pace of change. This isn't theoretical. It's already happening. And you'll hear more of these stories across today's sessions. Over the next few hours, you're going to hear from learning leaders who've redefined what success looks like. Not with huge budgets or big teams, but with focus, experimentation and better tools. You're going to learn how small teams are turning chaotic onboarding into clear, skills-led pathways. You're going to hear how content overwhelm is being replaced with curation that actually helps people grow. And how AI isn't the enemy, it's the enabler. L&D can be lean and powerful, personalized, scalable, strategic, but still human. But only if we're willing to challenge what we've always done. Before we dive into our first session, let me give you a quick rundown of what's coming up today and the incredible line of speakers that we've got in store for you. We're kicking things off with a brilliant panel featuring Sam Taylor and Heidi Kirby. What does a skills-led culture look like in a real small, medium business? This session gets real about what it takes to build a skills-led culture in a small or mid-sized business. You'll hear honest lessons, hard-won insights, and practical ideas from people who are actually doing the work. This one sets the tone for the day, and you won't want to miss it. At 3:15, AI as your skills development co-pilot. Yep, I'll be back, you lucky people. In this session, I will take you through how to use AI as a genuine co-pilot in building a skills-led organization. We'll walk through how to create and iterate a skills framework using tools like ChatGPT, and how to map, align, and evolve your skills strategy faster with a lot less manual effort. Whether you're just getting started with AI or already testing things out, this will be packed with practical takeaways, and it's also going to be a bit of a live demo as well, so things can go drastically wrong. So we'll see how we go. And then at 4:15, your first 90 days turning skills strategy into action. To close out the day, we've got Teresa Rose with the first 90 days turning skills strategy into action. This session is a must for anyone wondering, okay, but how do we actually do this? She'll share exactly what those first 90 days can look like and how to avoid the pitfalls that derail so many skill strategies. So, as we kick things off, here's my challenge to you. Let go of the way it's always been. Lean in to what your team actually needs. And let's unleash learning for real. Welcome to L&D Unleashed 2025. Now, to guide us through today's sessions, conversations, and maybe a few healthy debates along the way, I'm handing things over to someone who knows this space inside out. He's worked with L&D teams around the world, hosted some of the most honest conversations in L&D, and isn't afraid to challenge the status quo. So please welcome your host for L&D Unleashed 2025, Tom McDowall.
Hello.
Hi, Tom. How are things?
Very good. Thank you. Yourself, Fred?
Yeah, not bad. I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's going to be fantastic. I've just gone through the lineup there of what we're kind of expecting going forward. And, the first session dives into what a skill-led culture actually looks like. Why do you think that's like such an important place for us to start today?
I think for me that what the culture looks like piece is so important simply because skills are nothing new. Like everything we do is skills based. And so it'd be very easy and somewhat flippant maybe to go, well, it's just skills. Skills are everywhere. Skills happen regardless of what we do. But what we do have some control over is the environment in which we engage with skills, in which we measure skills, in which we talk about skills. And so actually considering those environmental factors are much easier to do within a sort of cultural conversation than it is perhaps in a classic performance management sort of environmental factors conversation. So I think really this is like the filing cabinet. We need somewhere to put the details, and our skills-based culture is where all these sort of tactical and practical approaches and techniques are going to live.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think when we talk about this, because we're thinking about mainly in the realm of SMB here, which can be very, very different to enterprise.
Yes.
And I think it's nice and easy to talk about, but then what we're trying to focus on today with a lot of the sessions is actually how you can put a lot of this into practice and how you can really sort of make the difference in the smaller organization. And, we've on that first panel, we've got some very different perspectives on that panel, and yourself included as well in there. I guess it's kind of similar approach, but what do you think makes that mix so valuable for the audience today?
So I think one thing it will hopefully highlight, and the today in general will highlight, is there is no correct answer to the skills question. There is no one correct way. There is no one singular truth in any of this. There is things that might work in your organization and have worked in other similar organizations. We too often look for almost like a philosophical, factual answer to L&D questions, instead of asking the question, what is the smallest, most efficient thing I can do to improve the current situation? And I think if we go into these conversations thinking, what can I do to make things better for my people? What can I do to make things better for my organization? Then we hear two different points of view and we think, that sounds great. But when I think about my context, it won't work. But that maybe doesn't sound as exciting initially will work in my organization. Which one's better, the exciting headline grabber or the thing that's right for your context? Having different views allows us to have that conversation and make those decisions rather than just getting this is the fact, this is the way, do as I say. And if it doesn't work, well, clearly you didn't sufficiently contextualize it, which isn't helpful, even if it's true.
Yeah, I always think when I think about when we do any hiring within the business, and I think you can look for certain skills. It might be, we do quite a lot of software development. So it might be a certain software skill of Ruby developer or whatever that might be. And actually that skill can manifest itself in many different ways, even within our space, in terms of you think it's just a simple skill. But actually how you look for that skill and how you test against that skill and interpretations of that skill can also vary quite drastically. So it's not just about, from the L&D side, but even between organizations, how they kind of understand and interpret that can be different as well. So yeah, a lot of good bits there. And that's what I think these sessions all bring out. So if you're just starting in, a shift to a skills first kind of methodology here, what should you be really listening out for in that first panel, do you think?
I think that goes back to almost that same point of, especially when you're just starting, you are going to be hit with a lot. There's going to be a lot of descriptions of an organization that seem alien to you if you haven't even started the journey yet or are just starting today. So again, look for those small things. Look for that. What is the next step in front of me? Yes, you want to be aware of the end picture. You want to be aware of where you want to be in 18 months, but make sure you're walking away from sessions with actionable things that you can do today, tomorrow, the week afterwards, not just a kind of very distant long-term vision with no idea of how to get to it. So look for those small items. Those quick wins, I think, we're not supposed to call them quick wins anymore because it makes them feel like too small a thing to care about. But I still like the term quick wins. I think it's a nice way for us to be thinking about this.
My team always said that I used to say the phrase low-hanging fruit all the time. That was always my go-to phrase. And now I'm aware of it. I'm trying to stop saying it as much as I can. But yeah, the quick wins is similar. That was always my guidance and advice. It's always, I think a lot of these cases, especially big digital transformations, big kind of, if you're moving your whole culture away to a skills first, it's very different. I think you've got to, focus on the achievable, focus on the controllables, as it were. First off, if you start small, iteratively it will come. And hopefully that's what we'll be putting out today in the talks. It's about trying to get some real actionable pieces. I know my piece later on is we're actually going to try and use ChatGPT live and say, well, how do we start to build this out as if I don't know anything? Let's try and put some methodology to it, and that'll help out. You've worked with big enterprises as well as small teams as well, Tom. What do you think that because SMBs are at slightly different challenges in terms of L&D, but what do you think that SMBs are uniquely good at when it comes to learning?
The ability to experiment. And this is like, people will be bored of me saying this. This is my passion. Big enterprises suffer with that Titanic syndrome. Turning is difficult when you're trying to change 10,000 people's experience or something. Small and medium businesses have an incredible superpower to go, we are dealing with, 500, 1,000 people, whatever the numbers might be. You can be agile. You can experiment. And when you experiment and the answer to the experiment is, no, that doesn't work, actually it's impacted relatively small area. You can pivot quite quickly. You haven't laid in an insane amount of resource to get it done. So when I talk about experimenting and trying new things, small, medium businesses have the absolute upper hand in that space as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, agree with that. Some great kind of pointers, especially if you don't think you have the time that we're going to illustrate that you've probably got the most flexibility there. So absolutely. Yeah, I guess we're probably about time to kick things off, are we?
We are. And so with that, I want to say, Fred, thank you so much for kicking us all off and getting the event started. And I want to introduce our first panel and welcome to the stage the first of our speakers, Dr. Heidi Kirby. Heidi, if you'd like to come on and introduce yourself to anyone here who might not already know you.
Hello, hi, yes. So I'm Dr. Heidi Kirby, and I have been in the L&D space for nearly a decade now. It's getting to the point where we stopped talking about how long it's been, but I've done instructional design roles, and I've led teams of instructional designers in both L&D and customer education.
Fantastic. And your counterpart for today's discussion, could I please welcome to the stage and ask to introduce themselves, Sam Taylor.
Hi everyone. So my background has been in all manner of roles, also inside of L&D, and most recently I've sort of looked at skills in both great behemoth organisations of sort of 300,000 people, all the way down to brand new startups of about 250 people. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for joining us. We are going to dive right in, but I would like to invite everyone in the chat to get involved during this. So we've got some questions that I would say we, but I really should just say I have decided in my omnipotence that are super important that we explore. But this time is yours. We're here for your development. Not just to cover what I think we should cover. So if there's a question we're not discussing that you think we need to, please do put it into the chat. I cannot promise you we will cover everything you put in there. One, we have a kind of topic area that we will stick to, and two, we only have limited time, but we will do our best to try and cover some, and if there are loads that we can't cover, we'll try and come out to you with answers sort of asynchronously. That's a nice corporate word to round off that introduction. So Heidi, Sam, to kick us off, Sam, could you talk to us a little bit about when we talk about a skills-led culture, what that actually looks like day to day in operations, as opposed to kind of the 300-meter corporate view of the term culture we often hear?
Yeah, I mean, you can often hear about skills-based cultures or skills-based organizations. I think fundamentally in the organizations that I've worked in, it's been around leveraging skills over capabilities, competencies, whatever the other buzzword of the week happens to be at the particular time. But it's about taking an approach where this isn't an L&D issue alone. It's actually integrated into your talent acquisition. It's integrated into your performance management processes. It's integrated into talent development, because skills by themselves are not going to grow and thrive in an organization when it's just L&D looking after it, because we need to have conversations around what skills do you need in a role? Well, that definitely feeds into your job profiles and role decisions. And there's even some things around a skills-based culture where it sort of transcends that concept of a job. There are some fundamental decisions you need to make. And by when I say you, actually, it's probably the business. Why are we doing this? And leadership around, do you even want to use the concept of a job anymore? And actually, is it about a profile where you're leveraging different skills to do a particular task at a point in time? That works obviously more neatly in a startup environment where it's usually all hands on deck.
Fantastic. And Heidi, do you want to chime in on that one as well? Kind of what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have much to add because that was pretty comprehensive. I love the part about including other people, because to really teach skills, you cannot do it with just one e-learning once, right? Like that's not how skills are taught. But I also think that from an L&D perspective, a really easy way to oversimplify it is to focus rather than focusing on what people know, focus on what they're doing, right? That's one really easy way to kind of like start to make that dive into the skills-led organization.
So one thing you kind of really touched on quite heavily there across those answers is that cross-functional working relationship, that this isn't just an L&D thing, which I think we would all agree is super easy and sounds powerful to say on a call like this. And then the reality of the world arrives with, these human beings who perhaps aren't great at working cross-functionally all the time. So in terms of, in your experiences, what does that look like? What do we need to do? Because I'll be honest, most organizations I've worked in, that is not the reality on the ground at arrival. It might be somewhere we can get to, but it's very rarely happens by accident, as it were. Heidi, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, so I thought of a little metaphor for this one. Now, imagine you're working in an office, right? And you have a work friend at that office, and they've got a deadline, and they're really buckled down. They're in their cube. They don't want to be disturbed. They're really working towards this goal or this deadline. And you find out that there's a food truck coming to the office for lunch. Are you going to tell them, come on, leave your work and come get this food truck food with me? No, if you're a good work friend, you're going to say, hey, what do you want from this food truck? I'll grab you something and bring it to you, right? So we need to treat that skills-led kind of approach the very same way, right? We don't want to just create a bunch of e-learning that lives in our own LMS and expect busy people, overwhelmed people that are working under limited budgets to come to us. Instead, we have to take those things to them. And the other thing is to figure out which skills affect the most people, right? Like figure out those, cast that very broad net, find out like what are the 20% of skills that 80% of our workforce all need, right? And those should be things that you're already covering in onboarding. You might not be, but you should be. And so look at that, look for those skills. And so, for like a startup, that might be something like problem solving skills, project management, technical skills on the actual product that the startup is selling, right? And so, find out where people are doing things. Does the marketing department have an email that they send out to the entire department every week? Get a little paragraph in that email talking about project management, right? If the sales leaders meet bi-weekly, grab one of those meetings and ask if you can have 15 minutes and sell it as, hey, we'd love to have 15 minutes at your sales leader meeting to talk about problem solving skills, rather than making you all come to this 30-minute e-learning in our LMS, right? Like go to the people, go where they are, do little things and start to lay that breadcrumb trail of what those skills look like.
Great stuff. And Sam, do you want to continue on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose from a broader people team perspective, chances are some of this stuff is going on in pockets. So obviously it depends on the size of your organization. When I was working for a startup, we had a people team of 5 people. So actually figuring out what everybody else was working on was quite easy to get in and involved on that. And I actually got brought in to help out from the talent side to move the project forward. But I think the other interesting thing is, again, from the people team perspective, I was at an event probably about in March time that was all about skills and building skills-based cultures, but it was fixated from a talent acquisition side of things. The conversations they were having, the discussions, the challenges, the problems, everything was exactly the same conversation that we'd had at Learning Technologies the year before. So I think there's a real opportunity to actually just, certainly within our own functions, sit and talk to one another and look for those areas of commonality that actually, I suppose, building on Heidi's food truck, if it's, I know you're doing a team lunch, what can each person bring to contribute towards that team lunch? Because obviously a problem that's sort of shared amongst you is going to be a lot easier to get through things. And I think I suppose the final thing on that is it's going to take talking to one another and agreed definitions back to the sort of the intro conversation. What do skills mean for us? What does skills development look like? How are we going to record this? Where are we going to record this? Are we going to have a consistent terminology for what a skill is, even between functions? So there's lots of things where you do need to build a consensus or at least a discursive culture in order to make this succeed. Just going off and working in a silo, it's going to fall flat.
Love that. That's great stuff. And I think one thing that struck me listening to both of you there is there's so much conversation in specifically L&D for a moment at the minute about how do we show value? How do we prove that we're valuable to the organization? And we tend to obsess about that being like a number or a somewhat ambiguous return on investment claim that we can't quite prove, but we're going to make anyway. This would be a great example of there's no number attached to this, but aligning with these same problems as other areas is a wonderful opportunity to show value to other functions. It may not go, hey, training solved these problems, but it is us showing value. So a really nice opportunity to branch beyond this there. With that, though, I want to move on slightly to we were focusing somewhat today on small, medium businesses specifically. So often, and this is going to be a bit of a generalization, but often small and medium businesses do not have massive budgets dedicated to L&D departments in their entirety. Specific skills-based initiatives probably get a slice of that pie, not even all of it. So what's the most effective and probably cost-effective, I guess, is part of this discussion, way of embedding skills development without overwhelming the business, the function, or the budget, which I appreciate is a bit like the I want it good, I want it fast, I want it cheap discussion. Sam, do you want to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, Heidi's kind of already touched on this a little bit in the previous questions. Yeah. But I think the number one thing to remember about skills is that skills has nothing to do really with courses. Certainly in one of the bigger organizations I was working in, there was a huge focus on skills development and using a really expensive system. And it was all about how you could move up that skill level from a level 1 potentially up to a level 9. There's going to be a certain point in that scale where a course is not going to be effective. You're not actually going to develop a skill. A skill is developed through practice. So actually from when you do not have unlimited budget, and in my previous organization, I had zero budget, it's looking at the broader definition of learning, moving away from learning equals course and actually looking for the opportunities. What are the gigs? What are the projects? What are the stretch assignments? Who are the mentors? What are the opportunities to actually get exposure to that skill, be it job shadowing, all of that kind of stuff that will actually build someone's exposure to a skill and give them the opportunity to practice it. That being said, there's again going to be that caveat that you're going to have to work on those line managers to make sure that, yeah, it's all right having somebody who isn't necessarily 100% at that skill and they're actually going to be practicing something, to actually get them into that mindset of it may not be perfect because that individual is learning.
Love it, and that's gone down very well in the chat as well. I think there's that frustration, isn't there? Right, if you're going to L&D, some form of learning must be the problem. It must be a cognitive issue. It must be something we can train away. Heidi, do you want to pick us up on how we decide which skills to focus on, especially kind of where, not again, this is a bit of a sweeping brush moment, but everyone thinks their need is urgent. Right. So how do we do that prioritization piece with skills?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but if you look at kind of the skills that 80% of your workforce all need, right? You wouldn't be able to paint like a really broad brush because that's going to be the way that you show the most value, right? And again, like as Sam's been saying, like, this is not just a training learning thing. Like you also need to talk with your recruiters and your leadership and your C-suite and say like, okay, yes, we can teach some of this, but also we need to be hiring for these things as well, right? Like these are the skills that everyone needs to have and decide what can be hired for and what can be taught, right? So like, for instance, for SaaS companies, right? Startups, software as a service, right? You've got a product and a lot of people coming in may not know the product, but they might have really good critical thinking skills and they might have really good problem solving skills. So figure out what those skills are that you need to hire for and what you can teach. And then like Sam said, you know, it's not about one e-learning, right? Or, you know, we have a 3-hour in-person leadership development program. That's not a leadership development program. And look for what those skills are across the board. And I would say that a bad way to do this is by looking at job descriptions, because I've seen a lot of companies just take, like, let's take every job description and compare them all to see what skills they have in common. Well, first of all, those are our wish lists, right? And you may not be hiring people with those specific skill sets. So you really kind of have to look at day to day, what do we need? What do we have? What are we lacking? And then, just the needs assessment piece really has to be there. And if you don't do that and you've never done it before and you just take whatever comes into the form, then you probably need to look at your process as well.
Or not have a form at all. Scary.
Or not have a form
Maybe
at all.
people being able to request something specific is a bad idea. But before that blows up in my face horrendously for poking at that particular bear today, there was a question that because we prep for these things, this was an important enough event that we actually got together ahead of time. Those who have done events with me before know this is a massive rarity. Tom doesn't rehearse, he just shows up. The question I think we were all quite eager to get into, which I think touches on a lot of what makes all of this so challenging, is the role of managers, line managers, middle management, senior leadership in all of this. So what role do managers play in reinforcing or perhaps undermining a skills-based approach? And how can we help them? How can we enable managers to be a positive force in this? Sam, do you want to kick us off on this, and then we'll come to Heidi?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Fred said just before the session started, which is the problem is that for a lot of managers and for a lot of leaders, we have to get them to let go of the way it's always been. If you go, I remember in my last role, we were going out, we were leveraging a skills-based recruitment platform, as much as anything to actually increase the inclusion and sort of the breadth of potential candidates that we could get. And we had a conversation with a senior leader. What are the skills that you need for this role? Getting a manager to articulate skills is really tricky. There needs to, I don't want to even use the word development course, but there needs to be something that you do with that population in order to, and again, it goes back to that bit that I said at the beginning, you've got to get the business on board. This has to be led by the business so that they're speaking, or we're all speaking the same language. We obviously don't want it to be a learning speak thing. So, I mean, I think it's sitting down and knowing that this potentially is going to be very painful and potentially being that annoying toddler going, why, when they're saying particular skills, to get to what is it that you really need? Because I think ultimately skills are not the end goal of this. Performance is the end goal of this. So how can we, so it's potentially, to Heidi's point before, reframing some of the questions we might traditionally have asked them in order to try and get to what are the performance outcomes that we're looking for and what do they need to be doing. I think the key thing for me usually is of trying to discourage people from asking or asking them the question of what do people need to know. It's not that, it's what do they need to do. These days you can look stuff up, you can chat GPT it in 30 seconds. So what do we want people to be doing? And that will give us that idea of what a skill is, because that's usually your knowledge in practice.
Love it. I think that point about bringing us to performance, I think this is where this conversation inevitably needs to change. Often, and sorry, I'll hand over to you in a minute, Heidi, but it's one of those words. I get excited whenever someone brings it up, and it's not me. This is good. But it's so often missing from the skills conversation because of this perception that skills are taught and therefore are training related and therefore are knowledge driven. They may have a knowledge foundation, as most things do, but as you say, the size of that required foundation of knowledge is shrinking because of our ability to access information quickly, to search, to ChatGPT. Though the idea of ChatGPT as a search engine still makes me incredibly nervous. It's good 90% of the time, but that 10% is disastrous, depending on what you're doing. But you know, so that's really exciting. It's something I'd say to everyone watching and listening. Keep that in the center of your thoughts moving forwards through the rest of this conversation and the remaining sessions, is how does this tie to performance? Whether you're looking at from a Rumler or a Gilbert or whatever perspective, I tend to come at it from kind of like a behavior engineering perspective. Think about how it ties into that, because the worst thing we can do is view all things skills as one totally separate thing to all our performance engagement approaches, rather than viewing them as one and the same and all part of one cohesive approach. Sorry, I've gone on. Heidi, let me hand that over to you.
Yeah, I think understanding how important managers are to an organization, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, right? But there are research studies that show that your manager is as impactful on your mental health as your partner, right? There are studies that actually show that and prove that. And we're not just talking about managers across the organization. What's really, really important is the L&D managers as well, and the L&D leadership, because that's where these things can really fall flat. And I've seen it happen is if you have people in L&D leadership positions that don't understand performance, that think that a learning program is giving everybody access to LinkedIn Learning and then walking away from the Michael Bay explosion, like that's not it's not a feasible solution. So really being able to influence and explain yourself, right, is really, really key to helping those people understand how important this is. And one of the things that, you have to really learn how to do is be influential, right? To build trust and then to be able to leverage that trust and speak the language that the company understands, right? I had a VP of product who wanted to measure our customer education program success on completions and survey results. And I was like, oh, especially with customers, right? I was like, listen, we don't want them to complete these courses because we want them to get what they need, get the heck out and go actually use the software that we're selling them. And so when I put it that way, like time saved, they're going into the product faster. This is a VP of product, like that, light bulbs. He's like, oh yeah, like that's what we want. We want them in the product faster. We want them to have their questions answered faster. So you just have to learn how to speak the language that'll reach them and kind of influence them as well.
Brilliant. We have got some really fantastic stuff going on in the chat that I think it's worth quickly touching on, specifically around conversations relating to how this all boils down to tasks. Because there is an increasing conversation around skills or tasks. To me, and I'll kick off, and I'd like to hand over to both of you. The skills or tasks argument is a bit like the courses or resources argument. It's a little bit of an oversimplification to my mind to say it's neither or, it's both. The idea, again, like I said at the start, that there is one thing that's going to guide us to the right thing, I don't think is ever true pretty much in our space. There's always nuance and gray between those things. I do think that a good skill is inherently defined by the tasks it enables you to complete in a specific context. And therefore, a good skill is domain specific. It's not people skills. That's one of those sentences like, what do you mean by that? Because arguably, I could stand here and you can go, Tom has great people skills. Then you could meet me in person and go, oh my God, Tom has no people skills. It really depends on the domain and the context. That's probably a bad example and a bit too insightful for a work-based event, isn't it? But yeah, so I don't think they're an either or. I don't think it's an either or argument. I think it is there a strong connection? When there isn't, I would agree that skills become this vague L&D buzzword kind of thing that we go, oh, it's great because you're a level 3 people skills practitioner, and no one knows what that means and it has no practical use. But when we can say, oh no, actually, because you've got, I don't know, this skill, that skill, and that skill, we know you can reliably deliver this task. That is when it becomes useful. But I appreciate that's not everyone's perspective. So Sam, do you want to jump in on that first? Have you got anything you'd like to kind of put into that conversation?
No, I mean, I know I read it recently, but I know that Nick Shackleton-Jones has spoken a lot about the connection between skills and tasks when he's been looking at, obviously, buzzwords of the moment. So yeah, I would agree that again, not necessarily from the smaller company, but from the larger organization, I remember a huge argument I was having that the skill of marketing, which is still too big a skill. There's a lot more to it than that. The organization wanted one course or one collection of content and resources on the concept of marketing that would cover different levels. And my argument was, well, the skill for me as an L&D practitioner in marketing is very different to the skill that someone of my equivalent level who works in a marketing function would need to have. So I think it's back to that task. Task gives you the context, and I think that's the key thing. It's sometimes we love the idea of skills because we think we can just get to this sort of nice philosophical academic concept of what something is and what you need to be thinking about, and let's shove a few hundred models at people so that they can just dive boredom from those instead. But actually it's nothing without the context in which you're applying it, and sort of why are you doing this, or at least giving them the ability to think around, if these are the principles, how do I apply these in this particular context? If I move from this function to this function, or this set of job roles or this set of tasks, how can I take that knowledge and reapply it somewhere else?
Absolutely. I think the danger otherwise is we end up as the workplace education department, where we teach people and educate them with these wonderful, maybe really useful life things, and they find very interesting, but doesn't actually support the organization, which is our kind of, job, as opposed to being just life teachers. Heidi, would you like to jump in on this as well?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I think you both have covered it quite adequately, and I tend to agree with you, Tom. But I think maybe on the task side, maybe I would just encourage everyone to stop making entire courses based on one task. That's a great place to start as well, because I see that constantly, and I especially see it with newer people, like when they create portfolios and things like that, right? They'll do a whole half an hour e-learning on one task, right? And it goes back to that performance. It goes back to the behavioral engineering and how do we support people in their work as they're working. It goes back to the conversation about how to get leaders involved and how to get managers involved and how to do it in a way that doesn't overwhelm already stretched thin, budget thin people, right? Is to make sure that if it is a task, what is the least resistance thing that we can provide to help people do that task better? Whereas the skill is, like you both said, like the task within context, right? These are mouthful words that we're using here today too, by the way.
It's the wrong time of year for big words and long sentences, isn't it? It's summer. We should all just be going yes, no, something in between. That's we need the equivalent of multiple choice questions for the rest of this.
Yes.
That's no, we've got a couple more questions actually from the chat before we come back to our last couple of predefined ones. So one for some reason it's not pulling through your name. I do apologize, LinkedIn user. I'm certain that's not what's on your account. Do we think that the focus on skills remains prominent because our educational systems are still heavily reliant on the industrialized approach to education? Talk about big words and big questions, and then we get this one. What do we think, or do we not know? Because I realize there is a strong chance that certainly I read this and went, I need to do some research and come back to you in a week with my answer to that one. Is my personal position on that? I'm afraid. I wish I had an answer for you. But Heidi, Sam, do either of you feel comfortable going at that off the cuff, or?
I mean, I'd want to do some more digging, but I would argue that skills has only just started to have a resurgence, and I think it's because historically, from an L&D context, whenever we referred to skills, as I said at the start, could be interchanged with competencies, behaviours, whatever. Again, without anybody truly understanding what those things were. And we as L&D practitioners tended to use them more as a classification system to dump millions and millions of boring courses into our LMSs for people to access them. and then you just sort of, as an end user, aimlessly click through stuff. I would argue, part of me wants to say that I don't think skills do reflect an industrialized approach to education, because I think if they did, we'd be learning a lot of different stuff at school. That's my initial gut response. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who was advocating for more practical based stuff. And it's like, well, I've definitely never needed to calculate the circumference of a bicycle chain in my working life that I had to do in my GCSE maths. So I think it's there's a lot of skills that we need in the place of work that I don't think our education system has actually been giving people. So that might be more topic and content, and again, but that's just my initial gut response.
Oh, Tom, are you muted?
I can't hear you, Tom.
Sorry, I am. Yes. Heidi? Is there anything you'd like to add on that one?
So I know Latoya who asked this question, and I'm guessing I know like her perspective on it. And I think, you know, Sam, to your point, the reason we kind of got away from skills a little bit is because, I mean, if we really want to get philosophical about it, we can talk about how we started with behaviorism and then moved into this more constructivist view of education. And that caused us to care more about people and communication and interaction. And we got a little bit away from behavior and performance, maybe a little bit too much. And I love how learner-centered we've become as a result of that more constructivist approach. But I think that we kind of lost something. You know, humans, we have a tendency to overcorrect, right? We let the pendulum swing a little too far the other way, and then we find kind of like a balance in the middle. And I hope that that's what we're doing now, is kind of finding this balance between communication and, you know, this amorphous, abstract learning and like skills and performance.
Marvelous. You might even call it a blend. But there we go. Well, sorry. And we've got one more. I think one more thing to pick up from the chat before we dive back in. I think it has squeezed it all onto screen. It just happens to be a big one. So, Gustavo has analysed the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report from 2016 to 2025. This is one of my favourite reports, so this makes me very happy. And it seems like essential skills haven't changed that much. But at least in Brazil, the way L&D has developed skills has not changed either. Why do businesses and L&D consultants keep insisting on ignoring that education is not transmission of content? So let's dive. Anyone got any opinions on this? Probably not, I guess. No, pretty dull topic.
Okay.
I was going to say they actually haven't changed since. I can't remember who wrote it, but there was a book that came out in about 2011 called Future Skills. And when I looked up what was in that book that I bought in 2011 to this year's report, guess what was still exactly the same? It is. I actually had a massive rant on LinkedIn about it at some point this year, because I said, why have we learned nothing? Why are we repeating exactly the same things year on year? Or why is it not sticking? So, I mean, I think the problem is culturally in a lot of organizations, learning still equals course. It's one of my big bugbears and one of the things that I will rant about on any given day of the week. And similar to Heidi's point, I don't care if anybody ever goes in my LMS to access content. I care that they can do the job. I would rather they go and look up a quick reference guide on the intranet than sit through some pointless LinkedIn learning course. So I think it comes down to what is the point of L&D inside of organizations. And to Heidi's point just now, we're moving back towards that focus on actually it's about performance, and trying to, again, it's probably less about us and probably more about getting the business to realize that that's what the goal is. Even things that I'm doing internally, which is I'm doing my best to try and stamp out the use of the word training anywhere, because I really start twitching, because it feels like that is industrial revolution. We're going to tell you everything that you need to know. rather than how can you actually perform better in your job.
Excellent stuff. So I have a similar thing to the term just learning in general. I wonder if all our talk of learning learning is at the heart of our business. It's the most important thing to us. That's a weird business. My business is there to make money. We might have to learn something in order to do that, but money is at the heart of every business. I think you'll find, not learning. Heidi, anything you'd like to add to that point before we move on?
Yeah, it's interesting because we also, Tom, you and I have looked at actually the change between those two reports from 2016 to 2025. And the biggest shock was that they didn't realize how quickly technology would impact. They didn't realize how fast. Like, they knew it was coming, they knew AI was coming, but they didn't realize how quickly it would impact and change things for the workforce. And yet we still remain unchanged in our own little corner. And I have a theory about it. I have this theory that most humans just want to like take an easy path, right? Like, they just want to go to work, do the job, not ruffle any feathers, not be particularly innovative, but also not particularly, risk-taking, right? On the other hand. So, there are so many people right now who are not tuned into this, who are just happily plunking along, making their courses about, not burning your hand on a fryer or, like something else that shouldn't be a course, right? And they're going to continue to do that because that's the reputation we've set for ourselves, right? And that's what a lot of companies now expect. And they have no other expectations. And if we don't bring them what could be, what is possible, then they'll never know any different, right? It's like why people come to us and say, I need a 30-minute e-learning on how to play tennis. And it's like, well, why do we need a 30? That's a very specific number and a very specific ask, And then once you start uncovering it, it's because I always use the example of when I first became of age to drink alcohol, I ordered a Long Island at every single bar because it was the only drink that I knew existed, right? And so when we have these leaders in our organizations, they do the same thing. They go, well, I know what an e-learning is, so I'm going to order that. Or I know what an instructor-led training is, so I'm going to order that. Without really thinking about it, without really taking a moment to say, is there a different way or a better way that we can do this?
Great stuff. So I want to take us back to a question that we all agreed that we really wanted to get into before we run out of time, basically. And thank you for everyone throwing more into the chat. We will come back to you if we have time. And if not, I'll make sure we get answers out after the case. So many organizations talk about skills-led approaches, cultures, organizations, all the terms. But almost all of them, certainly that I've seen, at some point default back to standard job titles, hierarchy, job description-based training. How do we stop skills focused, skills centered, whatever the thing being, just being a great buzz term to, for a consultant to sell a service or sell a product, or for an organization to reorganize the L&D function and then nothing happen? How do we stop that backslide? Sam, do you want to kick us off?
I mean, it's the holy grail, isn't it? How do we stop? I mean, I think it goes back to the business owning it, and it goes back to the business owning it and the business knowing that it's going to be a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. Because let's face it, tearing up the way that you have always been recruited, recruit for others, thought about recruitment, thought about development, thought about talent management, thought about talent mobility, thought about performance management, tearing up every single rule potentially and doing something from a very different perspective is I'd say it's almost a luxury that very few organizations can have. And so I think you'll probably find out through the later sessions today, how can you start small and just chip away at some of the things? For me, it would be starting with the actual title of the job. And maybe for even the people who are applying for jobs, when we think about skills, one of the big sells is that obviously you've got Generation Z plus whatever the next one is, and an Alpha and whatever coming in, and they're going to have portfolio careers and lots of gigs and do different things, but yet they're still asking for jobs and job titles. And even when we've recruited them from a tech perspective as software developers, they're expecting to go from a junior to a medium to an advanced in a short period of time. So there's still that legacy mindset. So I think it's at a macro scale, it's a fundamental change. So it's going to be about a consistent commitment, reinforced communication, reinforced messages, deciding what your approach is going to be, how far you're going to go down that approach, sticking with it, slogging with it, making sure everybody is saying the same thing, because otherwise, yeah, it will backslide and it'll just become another classification system. And I think the other thing to add with this is that, and it was kind of covered on the intro session, skills will continue to change in a lot of places. What is a hot skill one quarter might be different even midway through the next quarter. So you can't just say it's January, this is what our skills are going to be, and this is what our skills framework is going to look like forever. You're going to have to keep checking in on that every time you've got a new vacancy, every time you're about to run a new program. You want to be checking in around what those skills are, and are they still the right skills? Are they still the priority skills? So yeah, it's not an easy task by any means.
Absolutely.
Heidi, depressing, sorry.
Thing is, though, the danger, I think, is that we do view this as an easy thing. That it's simple, that it's build a framework and then align your training to the framework. And guess what? It doesn't work. And therefore everyone goes, oh, skills is nonsense because that doesn't work. So what, you mean a terrible implementation of a misunderstanding doesn't work? My goodness, you're right. Throw it all out. And yet so often that is the conversation. Because it is so rarely done well, we have a tendency to throw the idea out. Rather than, looking back a little bit, dare I say it, to the work done in the 70s around performance, which maybe doesn't translate one-to-one, requires contextualization, but would guide us on this idea of putting the task first and working backwards and all these kinds of things. Sorry, Heidi, do you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, I think +1 to what all two of you are saying here, but also, for anyone who's in a position to do this, making sure that your leadership of your L&D team and of your HR recruiting teams have knowledge of performance, have knowledge of adult learning, especially your L&D leaders. There's so many of them that are coming from other areas now, and it's a growing problem. It's something I'm actually currently researching because it's such a growing problem, because in order to have a champion for the work that Sam's describing that this takes, for the slog that it is, you really need to have somebody in that L&D leadership position who is ready for that battle, because the second you start making the pizza and start taking training orders, you've totally lost any ground that you made, right? So there has to be a level of resilience that is required to not only find those interdepartmental opportunities and where those little skill pockets are already happening, but also to influence leadership to get on board, and also to be able to take those small steps that it requires.
Fantastic. Well, that was kind of the end of our kind of prescripted questions that we needed to cover, or that I felt we needed to cover. But we do have some more in the chat, and we've got a little bit of time left. So Jen has asked, how do you see individual development plans as part of the L&D strategy for helping employees achieve what they want / need? Those last two words really change depending on which one you choose to answer, or both. Would anyone like to jump in on this one?
I've got to see if Heidi wanted to go
first. We're both silent. This is a hard one, because I think I have worked in organizations where individual development plans were for show only, right? They were just to prove to the rest of HR that look at how much we're supporting our employees. And I distinctly remember a VP of HR getting angry that despite all of these cool things that they did for the employees, that the employees still rated their professional development opportunities low on the employee engagement survey. I remember a meeting with this VP where they were just I can't believe how ungrateful these people are. And it was ooh, that's, So the culture is incredibly important for those individual development plans, because if your individual development plan says, I want to become a people leader someday, and there's no path for you to do that in your current organization, guess what that person's going to do? They're not going to stay, right? So I think that you really have to consider, do we offer the pathway forward for this if this is something we're going to offer? And on my best team, in the best company that I worked for, my team's individual development plans included the stretch projects that they wanted to do to learn new things, and the employee resource group work that they were doing. Like, one of my team members was the lead of the LGBT employee resource group. I added goals in there specifically part of that, so that became part of that person's performance, because those other things that people do are also important. And if we don't include what they want and need, we're going to lose them. And getting them to think about those things is a recipe for turnover, right? Because if you get people to start thinking about what do they want, what do they want to do, what do they want to be when they grow up, and the answer is not this, they're going to leave, right? So you have to be careful when you even give people this opportunity.
Great stuff. Sam, anything you'd like to go into on this one?
Well, I was thinking it could be an opportunity for another round. There's part of me that really hates individual development plans as a construct that sits inside of a performance management process, because we're always learning. Every single day there is an opportunity for us to learn, and having some structured document makes it feel like learning is an add-on rather than this is what your life is like. For us, skills and learning, our ability to learn new skills and respond to different tasks and different contexts, is our unique competitive advantage as an individual that will keep us employed and with cash to be able to buy all the things that we want to buy in our lives. So I think in some ways I would want to I think it's where technology can actually play a really useful part in this, because in some of the systems that I have seen, and some of them are only ever really suitable or won't even talk to you unless you're over 500 people, but there are now more tools that are coming on board that are actually better suited for smaller organizations. You could come in as a customer service advisor in a bank or even in a retail organization and say, I fancy working in marketing. And because of the magic of skills and the magic of technology, it can say, well, these are the things that you've got, these are the things that you're missing. And then to Heidi's point, here are some of the ideas of stuff that you can do. I also think it links us back round to that, what's the role of the manager? Because actually, for me, it's about a manager being able to do some really good coaching with that individual to get to so how do you think you can get to being that marketing manager from your current role? What do you think you could do? What are the opportunities? How can I help you get there? How can I help you look for the right gigs, introduce you to the right people? So yeah, I think that's probably what I would go for. And again, it's weird because it's not necessarily an L&D strategy as such. It's actually just saying, we're going to provide the mechanisms, your life, your journey, your career, go where you want to go. Obviously, there will always be more formal things maybe from a talent program perspective, but yeah, it's about putting the onus back on the individual, not on. I always get a bit frustrated. It's like, why should we be telling people how to get to their career destination? You need to do some of that legwork. It's your career, and if you exit because actually you've realized that opportunity is there. But as long as we've supported you, there might be an opportunity for you to come back in the future.
I think that's great. I think it always concerns me a little bit whenever there's an element of career advice, maybe, in these things. It's a bit like, oh, that's really dangerous ground. Are you really qualified to give that advice? Have you done that? Do you know that works? Or are you following handbook number whatever that someone wrote 10 years ago, and that advice is actually going to cost them the next job? And, I think there's potential still a lot of damage if you aren't very careful in that space. You can tell I dodged those conversations in every team I was ever on. But I don't want to do that. That sounds dangerous. Let's call this our last question because we are coming up on time, and it is a great one to finish on. So thank you for this. What unexpected challenges have you encountered when shifting to a skills-led culture, and how did you overcome it? This was not a plant. We did not ask someone to ask this question. It just happens to be a very good question to finish this talk on. Heidi, do you want to kick us off on this, and then we'll finish off with Sam?
Yeah, this is a good question. I don't know if there have been unexpected, like you kind of see it coming a mile away, I think. But I think one of the biggest challenges that I've faced is just people's preconceived notions of what things are, right? Like even in this conversation today, we've had to define skills and skills-led organization a little bit. And we may not be all on the same page in how we define skills, right? So I think like taking it back a step and really like getting back to like the yellow books for dummies, right? Like skills-led organization for dummies, and realizing that like, not everybody may be speaking the same language. So you kind of have to like walk it all the way back. But one of the other, I guess that there was an unexpected challenge that somebody who should have known better in our organization, like really just wanted to take every single job description and like find keywords and then use those keywords to make a giant skills framework. And that process was taking like 1.5 years for someone to do, by which point they realized half of the job descriptions were outdated. And then that this had become so massive, it was going to take another 2 years, by which point all of those skills would be out of date. And so it really is the communication piece, I think, is like you can't over communicate when you're doing change management.
Makes a lot of sense. And Sam, could you offer your answer for our last question?
I suppose we've kind of covered a lot of them already in terms of the challenges. Were they expected or unexpected? I don't know. Sometimes you kind of hope that the people that you were talking to would know more about this than you were expecting to. And I think it comes more around that definition, identification of skills / performance outcomes, because that struggle to get from somebody who was a chief operating officer in an organization to articulate what it was that person needed to do at a task and skill level. Admittedly, would a chief operating officer really know what the lower down levels would do? But it was quite a tiny organization. And the way in which they spoke about it was, we need someone like the person who's already there. So it's linking it back into characteristics, not skills. And I think one of the potential advantages of skills is that they are more inclusive because they're more almost agnostic. It's looking for, can you do this task? Doesn't matter about what your experience is, how or the way in which that experience has been earned or a specific qualification, but actually, can you do that particular task? The classic example that we used to have was looking to recruit a new project manager, relatively junior role. We want somebody with a Prince 2 qualification. Or what about that return to work parent who has spent the last 3 years juggling multiple schedules, drop-offs, pickups, looking after everything? They've got that project management skill. It's just been learned and applied in a different context. So I think that's the challenge, but it's also an opportunity to actually look beyond what is known. Absolutely. So sometimes there's a challenge around thinking laterally around a skill. What you call one thing may actually be realistically something else.
I think that's a fantastic example of that cross-functional value that we actually started the session talking about there. An opportunity for skills to not just be an L&D piece, but actually something that brings sort of some equity into the organization in terms of who can possibly be brought into a role. I am going to bring us to a close, because that means we can give everyone a 5-minute gap until the next session. Not just for me, though I will benefit from it as well. But I'm sure everyone who's been sat down for an hour listening to us would also like to stretch their legs, find the nearest biscuits or a cup of tea or whatever you're drinking. I want to say thank you both to Heidi and Sam for coming and sharing all this with us today. We're really, really appreciative. If people want to get in touch, what's the best place for them to do that? Heidi?
LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to find me, and I'll connect with you, please.
And is that the same for you, Sam?
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. We've got links to both Heidi and Sam's LinkedIn pages in the comments. Please do go and connect with them. Obviously, bombard them with all the questions that you weren't able to answer today. No, don't do that. Don't do that. What I will do, because I know there are probably 5 or 6 actually great-looking questions in the comments, I will go through and pick them up, and we will do our best to put together some form of answer for them, and we will find a way of sharing them with everyone. I don't know, a post or something. But we promise to offer some form of answer to those questions. Thank you all so much for joining us for our first full session, this panel discussion. And we shall see you in just under 5 minutes now, because I won't shut up, for our next session, which is AI as your skills development co-pilot with Fred Thompson. This is the one with a live demo. So if you want to see potential catastrophe in motion, this is the session to attend. I'm sure it will go smoothly because it's an AI demo and they always run perfectly, as we know. Thank you for your time so far, and we'll see you again very, very shortly. And we are back. Thank you for all of you who have stayed with us. There's a lot of you as well. Look at that. Usually you go to a break and everyone leaves and you come back to an empty room. So this is lovely. Fred, thank you for coming back and joining us once again.
We're back again, Tom. We're back. I've changed location since the introduction, so give it a little bit mix up because I'm on the computer trying to do a live demo. I thought I probably need to be sat down for this.
That's that just in case it doesn't work, so you don't fall down. That's the
pretty much, yeah.
that's I do exactly the same thing. You can always tell when it gets serious because a proper shirt gets put on and I sit down. That's fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us for this session. For those who weren't here at the start, would you like to kick us off with a quick introduction as to who you are?
Yeah, no problem. I'm Fred Thompson, the founder of First. We are a learning platform, basically AI-driven, skills-based, skills-first learning platform. We've put on this L&D Unleashed event today to try and help the small to medium-sized business community with kind of key strategies, key learnings, and actual actionable kind of insights to things that can actually they can put into place straight away, effectively, as a result of this. So the aim today and the aim of my chat today around the AI as your skills pilot is exactly that, is to try and really trying to educate and inform and give different approaches that the small, medium business can use to actually put AI into their business, but also to really move the needle in terms of just expediting the implementation of a learning platform or a whole transformation project into the business and using the latest tools. So my focus has always been tech. It's always been my background's software development, so that's where I always lean more heavily. But it's exciting to try and cross that over into the L&D space.
Fantastic. Well, and that kind of leads me into, I guess, my opening question for this session. I'm very pro use of AI, but I think it is fair to say there has been a little bit or just a few examples in the space over the last couple of years of tacking AI onto any given topic and therefore, creating a new conversation. So when you talk specifically about AI acting as a co-pilot for skills development, what do you mean by that? What practically are we going to be looking at today?
Yeah, I think if you follow my LinkedIn, I sort of have some oddly contrasting thoughts every time I'm sort of posting about AI and the frustrations with it, and then at the same time my next post I've been loving it. And I think probably a lot of people feel that way, and depending on how this demo goes today, it may be one of them too. But I think what we're talking about really is exactly the words co-pilot is the key bit. And I know there's an AI version of the platform called co-pilot, but we're thinking about it in the more traditional sense. It's there to assist, it's there to help out, expedite, streamline, but it isn't there to replace. It's how we can utilize the tool and the new technologies that are available in order to help us with our day-to-day in terms of this might be mapping out a skill matrix or a skills framework, or trying to spot gaps or put recommendations together, even as far as career pathways as well. And it's just it can be used to analyze the skills data faster, identify the gaps. It can recommend personal learning in there as well, all within seconds, based upon what would have taken us minutes, hours, days, as it was in our old ways. So instead of spending that time, L&D teams can now focus. We talked right on the entrance to this, which is it's still personal, it's still a human element to the L&D side. We're not getting away from that. It does not replace that, but it just really provides that scaffolding and brings human and just helps the human out effectively just get a little bit faster with the day-to-day.
Brilliant. And so I guess you also touched on this focus today on small and medium businesses. And in the last conversation, we touched briefly on this idea that whilst they have, as I describe it, this kind of superpower of being more agile, being able to experiment, they also have the perhaps constriction or limitation of not always having access to these, seemingly limitless budgets that some enterprise organizations have. So where do you think right now AI can make the most immediate and tangible difference to small and medium organizations?
Well, I love this because I think this is probably even better for an SMB than it is anybody else. Because if you think about trying to implement AI into enterprise, it is fraught with gaps that you have to overcome. You have to kind of step through as it allows, permitted, and reviewing all the policies, getting acceptance. It's a lot harder to embrace the new technologies, and we get there. Somebody said it was like the shift to the cloud. I think it was sort of like whatever it was 10 years ago, where no one could really do it because they never trusted the data in the cloud. And then over time, everyone starts to do it, and then it just becomes this. Just that's where, of course, we're all in the cloud. But it took enterprise a while to catch up because of all the gatekeeping as it went through. Where SMBs don't have that; they can simply play around with this, try it. They're in much more control. They can move faster. They're more agile. So I think that's one massive advantage. But the key bit of what AI I think provides SMBs is probably the thing that SMBs need the most out of all the sort of sizes of organization, which is simply they need time. They don't have that space. Quite often you may not even have a very specific L&D role, or it's merged with other roles, or it's someone's part-time job, or whatever that might be. So it's how can you still do the job of your more enterprise like business, and how can we get there faster with smaller resources? So the most immediate value for me is any sort of time-consuming work. We can automate that groundwork. It can help us identify, the skills required for roles. It can help us assess the gaps between that. That would have been a manual process. But it can also, we're not going to touch upon that today particularly, but it can also be used to summarize learning content, and it can be used to generate quizzes or suggest learning plans. It can be used for quite a lot of purposes. Now, it's not perfect. You're not going to just say, okay, there you go, I've done it, and send that off. But just to get you 75, 80% of the way there very, very fast is just changing it for the smaller organization in terms of how they can get there. And I think there's some studies on it. I think there's a recent Deloitte study that says 42% of SMBs using AI in HR said that the biggest benefit is automated learning recommendations based upon role or skill gaps. So you've got people actually reporting this back in this space, saying it is, really making a difference for them.
I always find that really fascinating. One of my earliest roles in the kind of learning and development and performance spaces was in one of these organizations where you had an internal L&D team, but it was like 2 people. They had incredibly limited bandwidth, and so each area, because it was retail, had like a designated manager who was responsible for supporting the learning and development in their area, which basically meant anyone other than store managers, their training, your job. Which was very exciting as a model, very wonderful opportunity, but exactly those challenges. Budget of what have you got to hand? Time availability of what time can you spare from your actual full-time job. There were all these kind of trade-offs and things you had to give, and this was very much pre the current generation of generative AI. And so it was sit at the desk and think and write and come up with imagery and all this kind of thing. And it inevitably meant, even on a surface level, things written quickly, not proofread. Clip art. It meant, layouts were not even a consideration because I spent all my time worrying about the content. I couldn't worry about how it was going to be delivered. Are they the world's most important things? No, but they add up to the quality of the intervention, And if I imagine going back to that role now with the ability to quickly get a rough draft done, it would be much more achievable. We could do a lot more for people, especially earlier in their career, when what they need is relatively simple stuff. It's not highly complex, highly contextualized leadership development stuff. It is how to treat customers nicely. And yet something as simple as that is very time consuming to put together when when it's not your field of expertise, and indeed when you don't have any kind of tech support.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think largely speaking, people are getting to grips with now what to use the technology for and how to use it. And initially it was just everybody using it to do everything. They're just like, hey, create me a post, create me an image, create me everything. And over time, you start to realize people can see through that. It doesn't quite got the level of detail, etc. But to your point about the time it would have taken to do things, that's where people are now realizing where actually it doesn't replace every part, but ultimately you can get a lot faster, a lot quicker to the end goal.
Yeah. And I think that idea of challenging our first thought, especially if you're a small team or a team of 1, it's very easy to go, well, I've got an idea and it's the only one, so it's the idea we're going with. Even if it's an AI, to have someone to go, great idea, which always thinks every idea you have is wonderful, as we know.
It does.
But you can then persuade it to go, but have you thought about the following considerations? And one of them might be the thing that makes you go, oh, actually, this is a terrible idea. I just hadn't thought of that. You know,
Well,
we don't want
a bit of
productivity.
a bit of what I'm going to talk about today, and on hopefully the demonstration, if it goes well. I keep saying this like it's inevitably going to go badly, but we'll see. It's just around that kind of idea that it's almost like unlocking a writer's block element to it. So it's a case if you know parts about your business, you do know that, but starting to put pen to paper just feels very just an enormous task, and it's just to sort of get a very quick question out to it, and it says, okay, well, have you thought about these things, or here's some suggestions, and then you go, oh, and all of a sudden that's just the groundwork, but that's actually allowed you to just relax and unlocked all the thoughts, and then you can come back with other questions and build from there. So that's why I think it's really useful. Like we keep saying, it's not everything, but it does just allow you to unlock kind of that writer's block element and push you forward.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of approach goes a lot towards kind of getting past this fear that I hear from a lot of people about if we're using AI for all these various tasks, we're reducing the level of human input, therefore it's going to be generic, therefore it's going to be not human oriented, therefore it's not going to be as effective. And I mean, we've kind of spoken there about using it as that kind of partner, that challenge. What other ideas have you got, or what do you do to make sure you don't fall into those traps?
Well, it isn't human, and it doesn't decide. Like we just said, it suggests. So humans still guide the tone. They still set the context. We still have that emotional intelligence side of it. So it's the things that AI up to now, because we never know what's coming, but it cannot replicate well. So it helps like scale the elements of personalization, but it's always really the L&D professional who ensures that the learning is inclusive or relevant to their culture or something similar, because you can help, you can kind of feed some of this information in and sort of get there. But when you human-centered learning really kind of still focuses quite heavily on empathy, and that really has to come from the people.
Definitely. And I think there's often this thing of like, we almost feel like, oh, we're giving over control. And we forget that we're still the ones metaphorically pushing the button. We're still the ones saying, do the thing. Because AI has created a piece of content for us does not mean we have to share it with anyone else. We can look at it with our own human eyes and human brains and go, no, that's generic and high level and rubbish, therefore I won't publish it.
No,
we're still capable of that.
And the stats that I read are kind of great at kind of arguing for or against, depending on what you're trying to do. And as much as we have a lot of stats today around sort of the AI and how it's used, there's a great from the Degreed, the state of skills, the report, a great report there from it's a couple of years back, but basically saying that 79% of employees feeling understood and supported is the number one factor in effective learning. So you're simply not going to get there. No one's saying I want the fastest content or the AI driven content. They still want that kind of human intelligence side to it. So I still think it's really key to have in your mind.
Absolutely. Well, I want to ask one last question before we dive into looking at your demo and then really diving into that. And if anyone's got any questions they want to throw into this session, please do jump into the chat. Or if you're hearing something you wildly disagree with, put that in there too. We'll ignore you, but put it in there for posterity. No, we will obviously engage with those as well. So my last initial question, small, low-risk experiments are something that I'm really, really passionate about in L&D right now. To your mind, when it comes to AI and skill development and using it as a co-pilot, what are those small, low-risk experiments you would like to see SMBs engaging in?
Well, you're probably stepping me in perfectly to a demo here in a second, but the things for me, there's a caution around, L&D and HR sort of roles in general. There is a personal data side element that we have to be careful about, and that just extends wider than just simply their name or address. It can extend to all their performance and everything attributed to that. So we have to be really cautious about initially what we share, how we share it, the terms of that. So that's, I think as we progress through, that'll become easier. People become more comfortable. That's fine. Initially, though, from that kind of, small experiments you can try, you want to probably try and stay away from the things that require that personal data, but things that can help you out do your day-to-day. So if you have training documents, for instance, that are not necessarily with unique data to your business that, relatively public in that regard, you can ask it to summarize these training documents, and just provide different summaries and then present that back to your learners as well. You can use that learning material to create quiz questions directly from it. To you've got some learning material. You might have 5 PDFs that generic training as it might be in your business, but actually creating questions is inevitably so difficult. just to create 5 simple, even multiple choice questions. It's going to give you some different options for that, and then it's going to start to again undo that writer's block. So there's small wins on the ROI. But I think the one that I quite like, and I think it's sort of giving, and one we'll move into in a second, is giving you this idea of how it can go and seek information about your area, your sector, your business, and draw considerations from other areas, not just what you're giving, to give you a kind of a wider and a different picture, and then how you can build on top of that. So the example we're doing today is around skills and around mapping out, a skills framework, a skills matrix, and looking where the gap analysis are between the skills. And I will always say, I'll caveat all of this with, it is AI, and it can go wrong, and B, you've got to read through everything. You've got to, it's like we said, it's a recommendation. You have to look at it and say, is this right for me? Some things won't be right, and at least immediately on first pass. But it's what's key to think about is what it's producing, how far it's getting us in that first request, that second request, to ultimately get to a position where we've got a skills matrix framework and we've done some gap analysis, etc. In the next probably half an hour of this, we'll have a quick demonstration of how that would work. And if you apply that to your business, that's a really good low risk experiment that can move you forward.
Love it. Well, without further ado, then I guess let's dive into that next section, because I think that's led us in quite nicely there. Do you want to walk us through kind of what's coming next, and then take it from there?
Yeah, I can. I just sort of set some context on some bits here. So core AI tools and AI models, there's lots of different options. They are all the same and quite different all in one, and there is no necessarily right and wrong. This field is moving so fast. You might have access to Gemini because you've already got the Google set of tools, or Copilot, Microsoft set of tools, etc. Claude and ChatGPT stand as the two standalones that are of note at this point. ChatGPT is the one that everyone knows about. It's the one we'll use for this demo, but there's different options. Claude tends to be really heavy on coding, that side of things, but they have different models behind them, which is on the right-hand side of this as well. I focus on the bottom ones, Claude and Gemini, because we're not talking about them today, but they, again, depending on what you choose, if you use 3 Opus or 1.5 Pro, you're going to get slightly different sort of variations of its thinking, reasoning, opinions, what it's good at, what it's not. And I think this is the bit that starts us off here with, people don't quite realize, and these are always moving as well, which makes it even harder. There'll be another model tomorrow, but these are probably what gives you the complete difference between the results you get and the validity and accuracy of the results. And I'm talking about the GPT 03 and the 04 models. So the 04 is kind of the most, the 40, sorry, I think it is actually, but it's the most standard model, which is the cheaper model. So it's the kind of one that does the generic tasks quite well, and you can ask it questions, come back. Now, the difference with the 03 model is that we'll actually use what is been described as deep reasoning. And what that actually does is it will go off and it will look up websites, and it will find information, look up forums, it will kind of rebuild queries, and it will effectively take its time to get an answer back. And we'll hopefully see today that it will take some time, hopefully not too long, because it's sometimes uncontrollable and it can go on for a while, but sometimes it'll think for 2, 3, 5 minutes trying to decide how to give you the answer back. And I think that's key and critical to getting a real good result. So understand your choices of what's available to you as an organization for free. You can pay for all these separately, but then also when you choose a tool, choose the AI models that are applicable for what you're trying to do. Things like deep reasoning are quite good if you're looking for not just a standard stock answer, if you're looking for it to dig in more information about your business, information about your sector, whatever that might be. And there's a last little note there. Subscriptions unlock top tier reasoning. It's just because the 03 model is technically quite expensive. So I think you can use it on the free tier, but you don't get very far. I would always say, if you're going to try these out, always look to purchase them on at least for a month or so. They are inexpensive for a month compared to what they will give you, I believe. But yeah, so I would say for the purpose of this demo, we're going to do ChatGPT and the 03 model. And and we're on a subscription on this as well. So yeah, we'll do. So moving us on, I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of how you get the best out of the models as well. Trying to not keep it too technical, but it's probably one of the key skills that's going to come out of the AI world at the moment, which is actually, you don't need to know how to create the AI or whatever. You need to know how to talk to it. And it's the most odd kind of skill that we never probably saw coming. Clear in, clear out is, if you kind of ask it, if you look at the weak prompt on the left, can you list me some skills? Sure, but it's just going to give you anything. It's going to give you any skills it thinks because it has no context. the stronger the prompt in 3-tier skills matrix for a customer success manager in this role, it could even be this sector, you want in different tiers, foundational, intermediate, it's going to give you a very different answer. So looking at the top 3, you've got to give context. You've got to give, well, you know, I'm an L&D manager, I'm in this business is in this sector. You know, be structured. You can kind of give it all the information that you kind of need to support that as well. So you can kind of give it any additional information it might not be able to retrieve. You can also upload files, and then be specific. Exactly the strong prompt. Say exactly what you need. So it takes a bit of honing this, I believe, to kind of get it. And I'm still guilty. And the last pro tip: don't waste tokens on please and thank you. There's a brilliant quote from Sam Altman of ChatGPT, the CEO of ChatGPT, where he said the cost of the please and thank yous actually are into the billions in terms of what it's costing him because of everything gets processed, every word. You don't need to be polite to AI unless you think it's going to come back to you and haunt you in a new world. Just skip it. Try and get right to the point. It's going to be quicker. It's going to lower your subscription costs as well as we go forward. So yeah, key things, just make sure you optimize your prompts, giving it as much context as you can, and that gives you hopefully the best results. And then just before, last slide, before I dive into the demo, I wanted to kind of introduce what I'm going to try and demo, the business that I'm going to use as the example. It's a business that's a customer of ours over at First, named OnBar. I love the company, I love the brand. They produce some absolutely fantastic chocolate with a lot of kind of focus on that B Corp, Fair for Life, sustainability, and vegan chocolate elements, all the things that are great at this space at the moment in terms of businesses. Their branding is fantastic as well, but they've obviously got quite a specific sort of set. So they range from the retail element to probably a little bit around the website, but they'll also have a lot of actual factory production and elements around the manufacturing of that product as well. So I thought they're a real company. You can go and find them. I don't work for them. I know nothing about them other than from what we know as them as a customer. But I thought it was an interesting use case to use an example of a real business that exists. And we'll try and use this as the base for the skills, pretending I am an L&D manager on Bar, and I'm going to try and do. And we did pretty much a similar exercise with these guys when we set up their platform to say, right, how can we map these skills out better for you? How can we make sure they's mapped to your business? So yeah, you can have a look at OnBar in general, but things to know about them. They're effectively a confectionery chocolate business with lots of different job roles in that space. Okay, so moving us on to hopefully live demo. I'll just make this a tiny bit wider and then it looks a bit better on the screen. Oh, that looks very white on the screen, doesn't it, Tom? It's not quite. But effectively, this is the ChatGPT window. I'm on the desktop application of the ChatGPT window. So we have nothing here at the moment. I've just opened up a new chat and we're going to start from scratch. First thing to note, I'm on the 4O model. We just talked about this. Clicking that at the top will change it. You can see quite a quick change there. We can jump to the O3, uses advanced reasoning. And if, for instance, we started asking the 4O, can we give me some skills? It will get it from its knowledge base. If we ask O3, it will go off and find some further information related to it. So I've got an example already pre-typed here, which is, and I'll kind of step you through this, but I've just said I want to build out an L&D function at the company OnBar. And I've given it some reference points. I've given it onbar.com as my main website. And can you provide me a list of job roles for this business that would be applicable across the entire business? So some key bits here, obviously giving it further information, my business name, and also kind of pointers so it doesn't get confused with another type of OnBar. But also list of job roles for this business, but it's not just going to give me L&D function business job roles. Hopefully it'll give me ones applicable across the entire business. So we're going to start there. We'll just send that off and we'll see what it does. Now you'll start to see this says thinking up here, which is slightly different, and it will take a little bit of time. It may even take a minute or two. You'll start to see that it progresses what it's doing. So the user wants to develop the L&D function at OnBar, and it's sort of, okay, they want to list the job roles at OnBar, a chocolate company, but they're focusing on certain elements. It'll search the web. It'll say, okay, I'm going to search for OnBar, chocolate company, careers, job roles. So straight away, it's going off and actually finding out from that website, have they got any job postings out there? Does it actually identify any job roles that they have? Can we map this more directly to something that matches that business rather than just taking a guess at this? It might look at job boards for that as well. Now it's digging into finance manager, job description at OnBar, seeing if there's a very specific job description that might look at. You can see it's looking at different sites like LinkedIn, showing different sources. And this is taking some time, but this is great to kind of it's not giving you an instant answer. It's almost like you've set a junior apprentice off on this role and said, hey, can you go and find this information about this company? Now, you're going to know this. You're going to know this about your business. You're going to know what roles are there. But if you actually had to do this in your business, you could have various different roles within your org, but then various different skills within there as well. And it gets quite time consuming to make sure you map that out and get that correct. So this is the idea here is we're just going to give you a starting point. So there we go. Thought for a minute, 15 seconds. Below is a broad whole business map to job roles of a fast growing bean to bar chocolate maker like On Bar. So again, it's known information about that business, which is fantastic. And it's grouped them by pillars of the company, which is even more helpful. And we can see we have the function there, production, engineering, maintenance, supply chain, and we might have quality, food safety. And straight away, these are typical roles. So you can see inside of the quality assurance, we might have a QA technician. In food safety, we might have a food safety manager or an R&D technologist. You know, these are potential roles that might exist in my business, may not, but they're focused on Bar as a business. So that's a starting point. You can obviously inform this if you have your own documents at this point. You can sort of start to feed it information that's more particular. We're just showing you the power of it knows nothing about Bar other than that deep research it's just done, but yet it's come up with quite a few typical roles that actually would match. And these have been actually purposely driven out of Bar's job postings or information that's available. So I'm going to move on in a second. I guess just Tom, what's your kind of immediate thoughts on that initial kind of list and that kind of deep research side of that? Have you got any kind of thoughts on how useful that is at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is how quickly this gets you not only away from a blank page, but to something that is not just, when I think back to LLMs when they first kind of became popular, where it's not a blank page anymore. It's a page full of highly questionable, somewhat useless information. Actually, this is well structured. I can scan it relatively quickly and easily. And what that means more than anything to me is I can relatively easily spot objectionable or inaccurate information. The fear, I think, with LLMs is that our ability to spot where something's gone off the rails. And when it presents something well formatted like this, it's not actually just time saving in terms of us having to format it afterwards. It's how easily we can look at that and identify, no, that's not there, or this is there, or that's about right, or that does or doesn't resonate with me. So that really, really helps. And I think the other thing is the fact that it, just by giving it the website, it's been able to go, because I bought the website up here so I could be a bit kind of like, oh, is that what that says? Is that what that says? And it, those pillars are there. And it's that kind of alignment that someone may not have thought of. Is that how you align to it? And if not, why not? If the website says it's important to the business, why are we not aligning the L&D strategy, the framework, the whatever, to those same things? I think what this does to me is act as almost like a preemptive challenge to the L&D way overriding something the business has already established. Now, we may still look at it and say, no, we know better, and change it. But at least there's been, on some level, a conversation or a consideration around that now. So actually, yeah, I think it's no longer just it's not a blank page. It's almost like blank page plus, to my mind.
Yeah, you've already made a start. And like we sort of said, this isn't really kind of, it's not the one size all, you've sent it and there you go, you've got your answers. But it started to unlock that writer's block. You've said, okay, we've got some roles in here. We can map them against our roles. We might have some roles that we want people to grow into that we haven't even got listed yet. That's going to start to give them. It also gives you groupings, gives you ideas. So we'll take this a bit further. I'm going to pick one. It's probably going to be a terrible one, but let's say taking production function. We'll just take the top one here as the example. Can you list out the skills that are likely required for these roles? And what this should do, again, hopefully if we prompt this right, it should effectively take these roles that exist: production, process operative, team leader, production manager, with a lean on Bar as a business, and not just give us a team leader in any sort of tech business. It should give us an Bar specific one. And then it should give us a list of some skills that are required for this role. Now, I'm going to keep this kind of lean and simple and just say just this function and just these roles. But obviously, we could run that across them all, or we can build that up as we go. But just to kind of keep it a little bit more succinct, we'll send that request off. Now, we're still in the O3 model, so that's going to still go off and do its more deep research. It'll possibly not take as much time now because it knows a bit more. The way that all these AI tools work is anything you've talked about before gets remembered and sort of sent in, so it knows the context for the production function that I'm talking about at this point, and it will start to use that as informing the decision. And again, you can see now I've got multiple sources to cite, crafting a skills list for the different production roles on bar, and it's hopefully going to produce them. That was much quicker, 28 seconds, still longer than your standard. And again, so we've got the job roles, production process operatives, a perfect example. Skills cluster, we might have food safety and quality, health and safety, continuous improvement. Straight away from there, you've now got a series of skills that link to a job role of process operative. And these are also quite often linked back to something specific. So they might be linked to just simple things like food hygiene, but it might also be linked to certain systems that you use, like there might be ERP screens. It's going to drag that information back as well from any information you give it. So you can get really specific with these skills that are here. I'm going to dig down a little bit more and see if there's a few more. There's quite a lot you can kind of do. You've got different sort of standards in sort of food safety that kind of match up as well. So again, they're all tailored to me as a business. Now what have we got so far? We've got job roles and we have got skills. So let's take an example. So let's take the production operative as the role. So we're taking production operative as the role, as the job role. Then let's provide me with the tiers of these job role. Provide me with the, can never type when someone's watching. Provide me the tiers of this job role. So we haven't got the tiers at the moment. So there might be a junior, there might be a mid-level or something like that. Again, this can help with that. And the skills and skill levels typically required for each. So again, what we're trying to do here is we're saying, well, we know we've got a production operative, because you've kind of mentioned up here, and we know we've got these skills, but production operative, does that come in junior, mid, and senior? And also, if it does, which, health and safety, what level of health and safety do you need to have? What sort of skill level do you need for each? So we're going to send that one off again. Hopefully this one, again, shouldn't be too long because it's getting a little bit more focus. It's less broad. And what this should start to do is just effectively provide you, and it's going to be different in your organization. Again, it's not going to be perfect. So it's not going to give you an exact skill level needed for each org, but it's going to give you a starting point to say, well, that's probably quite critical for a junior, but actually it's not that important for a senior, or vice versa across there. And it's going to map that out for me. So yeah, food and drinks, process operator, knowledge-based skill behaviors. Just while that's doing that, Tom, again, kind of thought process so far here, just your ideas. We're mapping that job role, we're mapping them skills, and then we're also mapping the kind of tiers of that job role again. Do you see that being utilized quite well in the businesses you're kind of assisting and helping?
Yeah, so I mean, historically, the way we would do this work is by basically doing this exact same process, but manually in a room in which you would need to have your L&D people, you would need your senior leaders on board, you would need your line managers, you would need to have interviewed people, you'd have need to do workplace observations, all to get a first draft, which we would then use usually as the basis for a card sorting experiment, where we would go out and say, hey, here's where we think all these skills sit on these cards under these different headings and these different groupings. How would you change it? And people would move the cards around, and we would do that several times to figure out what it needed to be. What this is doing is enabling us to get to that first experiment in minutes rather than literal days of conversations and observations and meetings. And yeah, it's actually quite difficult to get that many people to agree on okay, so here's what we're going to test. We're not even building anything, we're just testing. And it's difficult to get that many inputs to align. This gets us to that first test. I could decide to launch the project tomorrow and I could be testing on Friday. That's huge. Absolutely huge. Even if that first test reveals that everything needs to change, great, but we got to the first test in a day rather than a week. Scale that up across every role in the business, every set of skills in the business. That is a phenomenal time saver. And that's not then at that level of time saved, that's no longer just L&D time. That's real money at that point, because if you're building up that kind of pace, you are going to get this implemented sooner. Implementing fixes sooner means you fix the problem sooner, which means, in theory, if you're fixing the right problems, you're making more money or losing less money, whichever way around this is particular problem is impacting the business. So yeah, I mean, for me, this slots in perfectly in replacing a lot of very early stage meetings, conversations, observations that are valuable, but could be done in a more targeted way later in the process where they can be more impactful and more efficient. So yeah, I think this is looking very valuable to my mind anyway. But if anyone's got any thoughts in the chat, please do dive in. I know there's a lot of activity in there. But if you've got any thoughts specifically on this, chuck them in as well, because we'd love your input.
Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, I mean, I imagine you're going to take this now to even the production operative kind of job family and sort of say, hey, we believe there are 4 tiers to this. We've probably got 2 of the tiers at the moment because we're an SMB and we may not have all these tiers of job roles structured out. But we also have now a skills mapping for these tiers where we think that there's certain different skills levels required, depending on if you're multi-skilled or a trainee operator, you'll have different ones, and we can map that all the way out. So there'll be refinements from there, but that's already got you, 80% of the way through. And it's much easier when you talk to people who are not really as interested as you are in L&D or HR in order to, devise this skills matrix or whatever. You can sort of say, okay, you've got a starting point here. Does this look right? And that's going to be much easier to get their kind of buy-in. And you also notice from this, there's some really nice things. This, for instance, it sort of says this is the format most UK manufacturers use for their shop floor skill matrices. They tend to use this aware, basic, skilled, and expert. That's not something I would know. Obviously, I put this into ChatGPT and just asked it about OnBar, and it sort of said this is probably relevant to you. It may not be relevant as well, depending. But it's making its best guess, but it's an informed guess on that, which is really helpful. And they probably will align in that case. So we've got them here. We've got the skills. It talks about them in sort of tier 1s, tier 2s. If you're at different levels here, what you would need to do. So food safety quality. If you're at tier 1, you just probably need your level 2 food hygiene. But if you're at tier 4, you need to host audit walkthroughs or whatever that might be. So it's going to give you different ideas. What I then find really useful is you can start to get these in different formats. And this is where you can start to take this offline. So again, I've got another predefined prompt, just pasting it in. Create me a skills matrix, XLS file for the roles and tiers. Again, I'm specific. I'm asking it for not just a CSV, something that I can use in Excel with formatting. I want for this role and its tiers. I want to use the job role title and tier as the row. So ideally, it's going to give me that job role title of process engineer, whatever we chose, a process operator, along with the title of that and that tier, and the skills as columns. So it should hopefully take skill, health and safety, etc. as columns. And then it should include the proficiency level for each skill for these tiers, but also color that background color in as well to illustrate it. So I'm going to set this off going. That's going to do its thing. It should hopefully give us a file. Because I can't really open, particularly depending on what it gives us, I've kind of got a pre-done one, which we've done previously, which I might have to switch to in a second. I'll see it generates first. But this should give us something that we can take offline. And we can effectively then email out to people in these roles, or we can say, do these numbers look right? Do these skill proficiencies look right? So yeah, thought for 20 seconds, analyzing. So hopefully this will produce us a XLS file now.
Brilliant. Well, just before, if we're moving away from the AI, offline in the next stage, we've got some really good questions that have come in actually.
Sure.
So the first one actually is from Adam. It's kind of an idea. At that same stage, you could see loading the course metadata into GPT and having it reference which course should be mandatory, optional, or not needed based on these job roles. I thought that's quite an interesting early stage use case. Because I think something I'm having a lot of conversations about at the minute is how do we reduce the amount of enforced, mandatory, you must do X, Y, and Z before you can do your job role training, especially when some of it is so, well, everyone has to be trained on this. It's like, do they? Or are we just, saying everyone so that we feel safe? What are your kind of thoughts on using these kind of models for that kind of work?
Yeah, I think it's any sort of context, any particular context you can provide, additional context that's relevant to you. So it would be your training material, your PDFs, your staff handbooks, whatever. That's going to give it context. I mean, what I'm kind of illustrating here is how far it can get without anything. It's just here's OnBar, go away and find me some information about that and sort of come back. Then if you start, as long as you're comfortable with information you share and the training materials you share, I think you can get better value out of that.
Absolutely. And another one, it's not come through on here, strangely. Just one more before we move on. But it's from Angela. And she asked, do you recommend the token-based API versus the actual ChatGPT Plus like monthly subscription on the website? From your perspective, is there a lot of difference? Should people be concerned about using one or the other?
Depending on what service you're using and depending on how often you're using it, what you're trying to do, there is no definite right or wrong. I think with things like Claude especially, you can use the API priced keys. And I think if you go for things like the subscription on that, it will actually tell you what the equivalent price would have been in your API calls, I think. And it will then you can equate and say, actually, it's better to go one way or the other. I think the all-you-can-eat unlimited models tend to work a bit better because you're not trying to worry about how you use it, and you want ultimately results out of the answers and the questions you ask it, not to try and formalize how many tokens you use. But there's certainly use cases. The API connections allow you to connect into other platforms as well, so there's good uses for that. I think in many cases, just get more familiar with kind of its operation of that and how to use that before you start to then worry about that. The baseline intro to ChatGPT is about £20 a month. And you can run this for a month. And if you think the value we've got out of sort of 10 minutes here, that would have taken you a lot more in time, everything else. So I think it's a very small price to pay for a very kind of quick kind of upstart a lot of this. I've got on the screen. Is that was the questions, was it, Tom?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Let's move on to the next stage.
Good stuff. Well, this is an example file that I had produced from the AI before, just because I've already pre-downloaded it. So it'll be slightly different than what we had, but it's the same use case. So I did it on production operative before. It gave me the foundation, core operator, skilled and lead, very similar. On the right-hand side is all the columns which are machine startup and shut down, follow SAPs, etc. What it's done, because I asked it to, is I said, well, can you give me the skill level of these? And it's just an out of 1 to 5, very simple. And the 1 is the lowest, effectively 5 is the highest. And now I've said color code this, so kind of point out to me where the problems are or where actually the skills are not as required. Now we're only talking about a tier here, so you can quite easily see production operative at foundation doesn't need to know the HHCCP skill as well. That's a 1 on that side, and that's the expectation. But you might have, your tier 4 lead actually needs to be a 4 on that same kind of thing. Now what you can do is you can say, well, I've got my skills here and that's great. And I've also got the job roles and their tiers. And I can start to kind of map that against individuals. So I'm going to just switch over to another Excel spreadsheet that I've got, which is basically where I did I created this manually. I created a duplicate of basically of actual proficiency. Let me just go get to that. Doesn't quite allow you to do it easily. That should hopefully come up now. And I basically created a duplicate for this. And I just created 2. One of them is an individual made-up person called Deborah Dean. I like my alliteration, but the second person is Fred. And I'm assuming I am a core operator of the production operative. And I duplicated the CSV, and I actually put my own numbers in here. And this is how you can then, this is a manual element you'd have to go off. You'd either kind of establish where people are up to based upon a self-assessment or based upon their manager or peer assessment. You could do some objective evidence, you get them to upload something, you could do the quiz, whatever that might be. But you can effectively start to evaluate from there. We're still skipping a stage, but we're almost saying, let's say we've evaluated Fred Thompson and they are core operator, and we're suggesting that they're at this level for 2, and you can see HHCCP there too. So you can kind of get that as a baseline. We've used the base document for ChatGPT. We've just started putting real people to that. Okay. Now, what I've then done, and I will try and share the screen and go back to ChatGPT, and I'm going to try and do this kind of live if I can give it all the information again. So can we see ChatGPT? Yes. Okay, great stuff. And then effectively, I'm going to upload these documents, but it would have already known these. So basically, I would have given it the skills matrix, and I could give it the actual proficiency. And you should then be able to kind of ask it a question. So you might just say something along the lines of saying, I've assessed my staff and want to compare actual proficiency with required proficiency to visualize the skill gaps. The associated data is in the files attached. And that should hopefully go off and kind of use this data that we've done with the actual proficiency. Now, this is where you start getting to, you could obviously optimize this, not optimize, what's the word, but you can run obscure this data so they don't have to put real names in there if you want, or you could just map it to employee ID numbers if you're bothered about uploading kind of personal information here. But we've uploaded these 2 documents, and ChatGPT is now going to go off and look at these 2 documents and compare. And depending on what you ask for, we've been pretty vague here. We've just said, I've assessed my things, and it starts doing a lot of coding behind the scenes, giving you all sorts. Last time it did this, it did me a lovely little chart. Looks like it might be heading that direction, I'm not sure, but it gave me a chart of where my skill gaps are across the organization. But it gave me a CS feedback, which showed me exactly, again, color coded up where they were excelling, where people were actually not succeeding in that role. And obviously, if you think about this, if you've got 500 people, 200 people, 2,000 people, whatever that might be, it's very time consuming to look at that, even to build Excel formulas to do this. No, you're not needing to do that. You just sort of find that off and letting it come up with the conclusions at the end of it. So hopefully it doesn't take much longer. We will have an example to show you. Have you done this sort of similar thing, Tom, when you've kind of been playing around with these skill gaps analysis before?
Yeah, so this has been really interesting because one of the first things we did as a small organization when I started bringing other people in was bring in a data analyst. It was kind of priority 1 because this stuff is it's not the most complicated statistical work in the world or anything like that, but it's also not, it's not for me GCSE maths squeak through level. It's a little bit beyond me. And I think, to be honest, whether it's in your skill set or not, I would argue that it is not a good use of any L&D professional's time to spend hours, days, whatever, looking at numbers in a spreadsheet, building graphs, doing statistical analysis. The results are useful to us. They are worth having. The analysis needs to be done, but that's not our skill set. And historically, there's been we have to become part-time data analysts. Well, that's not realistic because we're already part-time 6 other jobs. And we've also got our actual job of being L&D professionals. So the first time we saw we could offload some of this to AI was fantastic. We found some limitations, as you would expect. So we've had to renegotiate how do we, decide what goes to AI and what is still done by our data analysts. And we found kind of a ground where we're happy and confident in the results, where we just spot check. And I would always argue that whenever you're making impactful decisions based on data, really spot check that data. You don't have to redo it all, but just make sure that you are confident you're working from accurate data. But beyond that, it has been a lifesaver more than once where we've needed to turn things around quickly, and humans can only calculate so quick. So, I find this is tremendously useful, whether it's gap analysis or performance analysis or regression or whatever it is that you need to do to figure out impact or to spot where you need to act next. Tremendously valuable.
Yeah, like you said, some of this isn't as tremendously difficult to do, but if you're even just building an Excel spreadsheet with the formulas and things, it takes time. You would not have got a graph and chart of the number of staff needing improvement by skill, grouped together in the time it's taken us during this demo. It's fantastic to do that. But it also starts giving you analysis on that as well, making sense of results, what you should actually do, you should prioritize. And then I can go further and say, can we give this as a chart? It can return, it hasn't done this time. Last time it gave it default. This is the brilliance of AI. Sometimes it does different things, but I can now ask it and say, can I get an Excel spreadsheet back? And it will give me 3 tabs based on, what the skill levels expected are, what the actual results are, and where the gaps are. And you can then take that forward as well. So we've only sort of got another 10 minutes or so. I'm probably going to leave a little bit of time for us to do the next meeting and some questions. I'll just touch on 2 last things where you can go from here. What's nice is then you can start to say things like, given that health and safety awareness is a big gap, which is kind of what we've seen up here, can you propose some training elements to put in place to improve this for the job roles and tiers? Please provide some example titles for the content that matches the business. And again, because it's got that O3, it's got that deep reasoning, it knows everything about OnBar that it's already learned, it can kind of start to formalize that. And ideally, it's going to take the tone of the business as well. So if it's friendly, if it's light, or if it's serious or formal, it's going to change that as well. So the titles should match that. And that's going to give me some recommendation. You've obviously got to create this content as a result, but ultimately you might want to start with some micro videos. You might want to start with a manual handling workshop or a site health and safety induction. And it tells you about kind of key things you might want to talk about in there, mandatory PPE zones, etc. And again, gives you an example of an on-bar branded title. It's say, welcome to a cacao safe zone, for instance. It's really nice. It kind of just that hand-holding kind of experimentation there, which I think is great. So obviously that's a starting point. You can move from there. And then again, like I said, interest of time to probably just get through a few last questions if there are some. You can take this even further and you can say something like, can you map out an ideal career pathway for a production operative as well, including routes to this role and also potential role crossover again. So it knows what roles it's recommended to you. It knows production operative. It might then say, well, they typically, if I search this with all three again, I find that they typically move into these job roles or move that direction. Because it will be taking in things like CVs and job postings on how that crossover happens. So you should find they're pretty on point or quite close to on point. But again, you can start to, we've gone from a demo here that probably kicked off about 20 minutes ago, from having a skills framework with list of skills, the list of job roles, the skills mapped against the job roles, the level of skills required for each job role. And we then put skill gap analysis in. We said, can we give us some training titles and ideas that actually allow us to close them gaps? And can we also put into place a career pathway, a roadmap for a production operative? And again, it's showing you there's different routes into production operative role here. We have food and drinks apprenticeships might be a route in. You can set these up, but also how you get through your different levels. And it kind of maps these out, typically how long you sit at each tier, what you would kind of expect it to see. From where we've got from and where we've got to in that period of time, it's not 100% accurate for every business. It is not, and we know that. But if you think about all the bits we put together here, they're just the foundation is fantastic to basically put this in place in very quick speed. Final thoughts, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really great example and exploration of, one, how far these tools have come. I think that it's always worth coming back and refreshing what we think these tools can and can't do. It changes so quickly now. It still seems very recent where, we're all kind of somewhat making fun of its attempts to string sentences together. And now we are in a world where actually, what this is spitting out may not be perfect, but it is absolutely useful. I would argue that what it is put out there is as good as the vast number of attempts I have seen in organizations by L&D teams to produce things like this in short periods of time. It needs experimentation. It needs iteration. Of course it does. But so would any of our first attempts at putting something like this together. Those are not symptoms of using AI. They are just what good practice should look like in 2025. And allowing us to get there quicker is, I think, incredibly useful. It's also a really good reminder that we bring an incredible level of domain-specific knowledge to everything that we do. We need to let that be what we bring to the party, and let AI do what I would describe now increasingly as the grunt work, the heavy lifting around the stuff that is not our area of expertise, be that data, be that industry knowledge that is not L&D specific. We need to rely on it and pull a little bit harder on that and get more comfortable with that being how we operate. It's a wonderful opportunity to increase efficiency, deliver more value, but also stay relevant. When we talk about how do we keep the human in the loop, that requires us to constantly rethink our answer to that. Not just say, well, because I'm not going to give up, I'm going to stay here and advocate for human first design and blah, 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 blah. That's all great. But that involves us constantly updating what it is that we are bringing. Really valuable stuff.
Yeah, superb. I put the summary up here. I'll not run through it again. You've probably seen it's on screen for a few minutes, and conscious of time. I see there's a few questions coming through. We will jump on them as well on the LinkedIn chat and try and get some replies back to some elements in there. I hope it's been useful. It didn't go disastrously badly, if that's what you're all hoping for. It seemed to work relatively well for AI, but I hope I provided some kind of insight on how you can use it in your business.
Fantastic. Well, Fred, thank you so much for your time today, for walking us through this. Thank you, everyone, as well in the chat for getting so involved. There's been some great AI-focused conversation in there. Please do, obviously, continue to have that conversation. And we have our next session in about 4 minutes. Our next session, which is your first 90 days, turning skills strategy into action with Teresa Rose. I'm saying our third session. It's also our last session. That happened quickly. The day is almost through. So thank you for joining us so far. And I look forward to seeing you for another session in just a few minutes' time. See you then. Hello, we are back for our final session of the very first L&D Unleashed. Thank you for staying with us for so long today. Or if you've just joined us, where have you been? You've missed some awesome conversations, but don't worry. It's all been recorded, so you can watch it all back at your leisure, as I will, because when you're here, you don't remember a lot of what you said, and you hope you haven't made a fool of yourself by this point in the day. You're all still here, so I assume I haven't. So we're going to dive straight into our next and final session. This session is really putting everything we've discussed, or the vast majority of what we've discussed, into action. It's what you do on the ground in those first 90 days. But don't panic. It's not me and my view on this. You've probably all had enough of that by now. So instead, I'm going to invite to join me here on stage Teresa Rose to first introduce herself and then talk to us a little bit about what those first 90 days should look like. Teresa, welcome to the stage.
Hi, Tom. Delighted to be here. Hello, everyone.
Brilliant. Just to kick us off, could you tell us a little bit about you and then we will dive right in?
I have worked in learning, largely I'd say more organisational development and more latterly organisational design as well, for about 16 years now, and this is my fourth career. So I've done lots of different things. Prior to that, I've been head of sales, I've worked in retail management, I've had my own business. I used to be an antique dealer, which not a lot of people know. And I bring all of that knowledge and experience as well to the work that I do. And in terms of skills, I've been working in that space for about 5 years now with different organisations, different types of organisations and different sectors.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's dive right in. Our first 90 days. I think to kick us off, you've got a few things to maybe clarify to make sure we have a shared understanding going into this topic.
Yeah, I've been thinking about some of the questions that people would want answered if they're starting from this from scratch, which I have done. I've gone through prototyping and then straight through to sustainment and governance, which was a 3-year journey. It does take quite a time to get there, depending on how complicated the whole organisational system is. So the first thing is like, who should be involved with this? And the straight answer is the people closest to the work. And I saw some comments on Sam's session earlier about, I think it's from Mark, that was saying how important knowing about the work and the tasks is up front. So you need the people that understand what the work is, what it involves. It should not be HR driven, but it could be something that you say, I kind of got this idea. It's about 30% there. What do you think? And give them shared ownership of it from the get-go. And it might be something that you've identified in the work that you're already doing, because I like to look at, and my experience as well from learning and development is you can act very much as like the central intelligence, because you get to speak to so many different people in our work. And you can bring that thinking together. And I've often found that when I've partnered with different stakeholders, when I was inside organisations, and likewise when I'm working with clients, that you can join up the different things that are going on and bring people together. So I'd say that's really important. And also, don't design. If you were designing, you're designing a product in essence, and you wouldn't design a product without researching and working with the end users. So think of it from that point of view.
Absolutely. Anything else here before we dive in?
Oh, and I mean, what stage do you engage them from the get-go? As soon as possible, because you'll start to uncover things that you haven't thought about, because, as I say, they're closest to the work.
And I guess one topic that always comes up early in this conversation is tech, right?
Yes.
Whether it's AI driven or enabled, or whether it's machine learning, or whether it's enhancing or enabling, or all these different technologies that are out there. What role does that play in what we're going to be talking about in this session and in the sort of wider considerations, I suppose?
A couple. First would be that AI is changing our work, and it's changing the work of everybody that we're working with, largely, not in all places. So that gives you an ideal use case. So you would start to think about use cases in this first part of it as well, and start to categorize those use cases based on impact, value, and the amount of resources that you're going to have to put into those as well. And then secondly, you mentioned the tech. And yes, there is lots and lots of different tech that you can look at that can help you scale that. But please, please, please don't start there. I beg of you, don't start with the tech. But if you are going to look at some tech, I would say one of the first things as well is first audit the tech that you've got, because there's probably functionality either in there that you don't know about or is in your roadmap. And often I also find that there's parts of your organization that are already working and thinking in this way because they might have to for regulation. It tends to be, I find a lot of IT departments are already up and running with this, engineering, etc. So start to ask questions and dig and find out where it's going on. And if there's something already happening, what can you do to make it better, understand it more, and replicate it elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we're often, maybe certainly early in my career, I was very guilty of, was thinking that we had to solve every problem ourselves because no one else could possibly have something that could fill this gap that EdTech must fill. Whereas, of course, whether it's marketing, IT, I was amazed at the number of legal departments that had incredibly good kind of CPD tracking and kind of understanding of who had what knowledge and experience within their department, because it was incredibly important that they had that, but it was not considered an L&D related thing, which really blew my mind when I saw it for the first time, but seems to be consistent. So real opportunity there.
Yeah. You tend to maybe get people that have a role that's then partial capability within those sorts of departments, and they would again be great people to partner with.
Fantastic. Well, with those things in mind, shall we dive into the first stage?
Let's.
So, the first 30 days, you have decided that this is going to happen. You have got the green flag. You might even have some budget. Who knows? Maybe not. Probably not. Who knows? Maybe it's just goodwill and sticky tape. But whatever you've got, you're going to be hitting go on the project. Where do we start? What is our first consideration?
Use cases first. Start to gather some use cases. We've gone through some of the engaging stakeholders, and you've got some more aspects of that as well. There's also the fact that if you're going to be doing this more broadly, there's the change management. So start to think of the potential resistance to change. Also start to pre-mortem it. We often hear about post-mortems, but I love a bit of a pre-mortem, is to work out what things are likely to go wrong, because I tend to find that this process, or working in a skills-based way, and I'm not an absolute fan of that phrase skills-based, because it sounds like that's all the organization does, and it's really about data, and it's one part of lots of other pieces that you'd be looking at within your organization around performance and planning. Where was I going with that? Now I've lost with going on my soapbox about skills-based organisations.
That's all right. I do that all the time. I hear the word performance, my brain goes, right, here we go.
Consulting, change and resistance to change. So I've put on that slide about the 3 top reasons people tend to resist change. So it's about co-creation from the get-go and giving them agency over it. And it also depends on what the cultural climate in your organization is around things like feedback culture, performance management. Do people think this is, that performance management? Where and how are you going to use this data? What processes is it going to affect? And I heard Sam mention earlier as well about the depth of work that you then have to think around with processes. So at this point, are you purely with a prototype, purely wanting to establish what skills do we have, what gaps have we got, what can people do? Because if you don't know what people can and can't do, how can you plan if you haven't got that basic data? And then also in that prototype is, I keep saying data, is go and look at all the data sources that you can, both internally and externally. and use that again to formulate part of a use case that you could take to a stakeholder, and goes back to my, and here's 30% of an idea, what do you think? And then that links into the co-creation. And it's not L&D or anyone else rocking up and saying, oh, we're going to do this, it's skills based, I've heard about it, Deloitte say this and Mercer say that. And it's grounded in your context and a usable case that can make a difference.
I love that. I speak a lot about at the moment, like this idea of like data informed decision making and
Yes.
data informed design. And I think far too often in our space, data is something we only talk about when we're talking about measuring the success or failure of something we have done. It's something we do at the end. We gather it and then we analyze it. And I love that what you're describing is very much a kind of, no, it comes first, middle, and later. It informs every step of this journey, not just, oh, we'll make sure we collect some, because at the end we'll take a look at it for the first time and go, we were totally wrong. Who knew? So, well, you, if you'd have looked at the data you had 20 minutes ago. So no, fantastic. So moving past the initial stage, then we've got that. We've found our use cases. We've engaged our stakeholders. What next?
Yeah, start to test these out and map them out. So you're going to start as well to develop a case here. So I've got some more about engagement here, and people can, I don't know if people are getting the slides or not. I don't know whether you're sharing them.
Yes, they are.
But this is an external case for change, and then you're also looking at the internal cases. So you're giving more anchor to what's the external environment here, and bringing in that expertise that L&D have, because we read so many reports. And I talk about using this sort of data ongoing as well. So organisations I'm working with, I'm setting up biannual and annual skills reports that they'll do to bring in external perspective and put that lens over the internal perspective. But you can start with this information, again, right from prototype, and start to develop those good behaviours and use different data sources, because some of it might be, well, what's the bias here? If it's a white paper, then often it's because they're selling something. So look at different pieces of research and mirror that with your internal data. And similarly, I think did I hear Sam saying that World Economic Forum top skills, and some of those I would categorically say they're not skills, they're domains that they list. They're often repeated, and they might fearmonger a little, because does that relate to the level of change that is realistically going on within the work in your organisations? And Sam also said as well, I think she said about even new entrants to the workforce expect a job. Jobs are not disappearing, and that's other external data that probably isn't realistic in very many organisations. We're not there yet at all. And with EU pay directive coming in, it's even less likely to go there.
Absolutely. It always makes me smile whenever I really like the World Economic Forum reports. I think they've got a lot of value, but the one skill, there's a few in there that kind of make me chuckle, but the one that I really enjoy, green energy skills. Like, that is an entire industry.
It is.
That's quite an impressively large grouping. If you can honestly go, yes, I'm a 5 in green energy skills, you must have done a lot in your career. So yeah, no, I think it's a really good shout, that.
Yeah, it's even broader than a competency, that is.
I have mastered the industry in its entirety. Can I please have an entry-level role? Okay, so
what we got here, should we jump on this one's a bit of storytelling?
Absolutely.
I find that often as well, when this work started, that the what's in it for me isn't thought about upfront, particularly for managers and for employees. And it's framing the use case for them as well as the business difference. And the real important point about this is it's very different to other technology that we use within our people profession, because the people are the data, and they have to regularly go in the system to update this data, to actively use it. If you don't have a what's in it for me, then you're wasting your time and energy.
Absolutely. And I think we touched earlier today on the importance of involving managers, but I think this is really a really important reflection point for us, because I think quite often I hear a lot of frustration. Managers aren't supporting the initiative. Managers are getting in the way of the initiative. They don't understand. And I think not always, but generally, whenever I've seen that, it's been on us. We haven't done the legwork to bring them on board, and we can't expect line managers in retail or operations or sales or whatever to really be L&D minded, to be thinking about skills, to be thinking about development, to be thinking about coaching even, because managers are not inherently coaches. That is a skill, or a set of skills potentially.
Yeah.
This is it. Less flippant with the words. There we go. But we cannot expect managers to just be like, yes, I get it and I can do this. Just leave it to me. If we want their support, we have to enable it. And we have to persuade them that it's worth their time. Almost a bit like an internal marketing campaign, selling to them this idea.
Exactly. Yeah, and just like marketing as well, it goes back to your point around the data. Marketeers and salespeople are always tracking data at different points. And that's exactly what we have to do with skills as well, and with learning and development too. Yeah, it's like you said, it's not waiting until the end and say, okay, well, that didn't work, did it?
Yeah, which I know I said that somewhat flippantly, but
yeah,
I've observed it so many times and done it. I'm not saying that somehow everyone else is doing this, but not me, for I am perfect.
Yeah,
I learned it by making the mistake.
Yep, exactly. I'm in the same club.
So I guess this leads us to a fairly obvious thing. We've touched on it lightly, and I maybe brushed up against it then.
Yeah.
Defining skills.
Ooh,
I mean,
defining skills. So there's a lot of contention around that. Is that the right word? Yes.
Contention, I think.
Contention. Thank you. Thank you.
It's too late in the day for this, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. And I've done lots and lots of research on what's the construct of a skill, and there are also some vendors who do depth of work with these skills as well, with the designing of the skills that are in their technology, and they use IO psychologists. I don't find that too often. What else would I like to say about a skill is it has to have certain attributes, so it has to be discussable, and that goes to can you discuss the work that's being done and the skills related to that work? Is it observable? So can you see that in action, in practice? Or does it relate back to the work that you're saying that skill does, and that task? Is it learnable? So can you provide learning experiences or other learning methods, be that coaching, be it mentoring, be it stretch assignments, that might encompass a few of those skills? I think one of the dangers is that looking at skills in isolation and not clusters of skills that then lead to capability. So we can go granular, but then sometimes it's far too granular, that it doesn't make sense, and we try to look at too many skills. Is it valuable? So is it going to be valuable to the organization? Does it make a difference? Does it affect the bottom line? So is there a commercial value to that skill? Is it a core capability that the organization has that's not can't be replicated? Are there proficiency levels and descriptions that you can then validate against? And then we could go into a whole massive hour more on validation. And I've shared lots of links that you'll be able to post. And one of those is a really good resource around lots of free resources and help around how do you set up skills assessments and validation, which might be your next step once you've started to do your prototype and mapped the work, mapped the skills. Yeah, that's the one.
Yep, we've shared that into the chat.
Yes.
We have been provided by Teresa 2 full A4 pages of links for you. So there are going to be some links in the chat for this one.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure they're all available to you at the end in one big lump as well. And another thing on skills, there's lots of really useful frameworks out there that you can learn from. Sphere is one, so you have the link to that. That has been around for 20 years or so now. I really like the work and the depth that's gone there. That's skills for the information age, although there are some people skills in there and they're broadening that reach. But the way that those skills are designed and constructed would be was some guidance that I used when I've prototyped
pre-using tech. And the I think Kepler and Co, who are the provider of the LPI's development tool for members, they have Sphere embedded into their platform. So if you are a member of the LPI and you get that access, you can probably take a look at it there as well. But there's lots of free resources, and it's open source, and they're a charity. So that means that it's very low cost. So if you were looking at an enterprise license, I think the last time I looked, it was under £2,000 a year. So it's not high cost, and it is around AI, cybersecurity, engineering, all of those areas that are fast moving.
Fantastic. Before we move on, actually, I don't want this question to get lost, because I think it's an interesting one, which is, how do we avoid biases sneaking into data reporting? And I picked it out specifically because I think sometimes there's this illusion that if it's data, then it's bias free, because data isn't like people; it doesn't have bias within it. But I think it's worth just touching on that for a moment.
Yeah, that would start to come more into your validation. And there's research out there that technical skills are more valid than human skills. So you'd start to look at, well, what methods are we looking at in terms of the what and the how, and that often figures in performance management as well. So people look less at the how and the human skills that people have. So thinking about some of the research that's out there, that link that you've posted would help get over a lot of that area as well around bias. Thinking about the depth of decision that skills data needs to be used in. So where can you afford to be more subjective? Where do you need to be more objective? Looking at data sources beyond purely skills. So you might be looking at 360, dependent on the type of technology you have as well. Some technology allows you to do peer validation in there and doesn't aggregate data until there's 3 or more peers. That gets over bias because you've got a more triangulated piece of data, and then privacy around that as well. There is research as well that men tend to get rated more highly than women, and women rate themselves lower as well. So thinking around maybe delving more deeper into that data, if it starts to show a pattern like that in your organization, is what are you going to put in place to help that, to support it? Is there other data points that you look at? Do you go and do some focus groups and interviews? Is that the trend that you're seeing? And it goes back to the skills reporting as well. There might be lots of other data sources you can bring in. So you might want to then drill down data into a team. You might want to look at pulse surveys as well. You might want to look at attrition within that team. There's lots and lots of other data sources that you could start to pull over that, but it's what's valuable to you. So you can't be doing that for everything unless you've got a huge data lake. And you've started this from the ground up, like EPAM have, like, what the work that Sandra's done. But if you're starting with this from scratch, but that would be like your further steps on your roadmap that you would start to look at on your maturity level.
I think literally the only thing I would add is, depending on what you're doing with the data, I get, it's one of the bits of language I'm pedantic about is data informed versus data driven.
Yes.
Data is a point. It is not therefore total. So for instance, just because the numbers say this is the case, that does not make it reality. You can, numbers can do weird things sometimes. It's important that we remember that we've got this data, but I've also got human observation of the world around me and the people around me. And I've also got, the process of co-creation. Sometimes data is pointing in the wrong direction because it is a perfect snapshot of the past, and things change. And so as we're projecting forwards, we have to be willing to say, well, the data says this, but given the following other inputs, we need to take a slightly different course, or we need to take this in this way. And so, it's just because it's data, it doesn't get some magical status of always being the absolute truth.
No, and you're testing that hypothesis as well. It's just like you've said, it's really important for those high stakes decisions. And that goes back to mapping out things in your use case and your data and your workflows, and where and how's this data going to get used, and being transparent about that with people as well is often I don't find within this work that it's used in performance management. It's used in other decisions, but then they might start to work towards skills-based performance management or skills-based reward, but I don't see that as that prevalent yet at all.
Absolutely. So we've got our idea, we've engaged our stakeholders, and we've started defining our skills. What happens next?
Yeah, we've got quite a few different slides here. I think I'll put some stuff up here about, well, what's the difference between competencies and skills, and there's quite a few definitions around that. So understanding, people are going to say this, they're going to say, oh, we've done this before, we've had competencies, why is this different? And it's understanding, going back to your business case, why that is different, that this is far dynamic. It's far more useful in terms of the data you can use. It's far more discussable. It goes back to all of those different attributes that I mentioned earlier and bringing those together. But this is research that Red Thread did, really around the top end of, well, when skills-based organisations started to become a thing post the Deloitte paper. Although in reality, it's not that new. There's research going back to the early 90s around the idea of skills-based human resource management. So it's not that new. It's the fact that we've now got the technology to enable it to work more smoothly. So that would be one of the challenges that people might throw up, is what we've done this before. So that's why I've dropped that slide in. And I've put in, I think there's another slide on definitions from Sphere, and also ones that I've broken down here is getting people to understand what's the language we're using here. And your definitions might be slightly different for you and your context, but this is an idea about, well, what's the difference between skills, knowledge and capabilities? Why and how do they work, and why do they matter? So start to think about your language and definitions early on. And that's why you're getting those people in the room at the outset and to agree on it.
And this is something that I know we've spoken about it before, but I always find very interesting, because there's a lot of different opinions on one. Exactly how do we define skill, knowledge, capability, all these other terms. To your mind, is it important as an industry that we develop a somewhat universal definition, or is it more important that we have localized definitions within an organization, or are they not mutually exclusive and we should be doing both? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Tend to see largely hybrid, that when people start to scale up with tech as well, that if they find a good vendor to use, that they'll take as much as they possibly can that gets then maintained for them, and it removes that maintenance level. Although there is functionality that I'm starting to see where that's even easier if you want to put your own skills in your own inventory management, that's been made far easier, pulling in from different data sources like Lightcast, etc. Again, that's another link that there is to share.
Yes.
Their data on the workforce and also skills, which is extensive. And I think there's a few vendors that use that within their platforms. I think Cornerstone, Edcast being one of those that I know about. There has been, I think, a real confusion created by all the different vendors. And I kind of foresaw this some years ago when I started working in this area, is because they all want to have their proprietary technology and sell you their taxonomy. And then it creates real headaches with interoperability between your HR tech stack and systems. And one skill taxonomy is like another. However, there are two big moves that have been, well, three probably, I would say, depending on where you're located, is the UK are looking at a national skills framework. So the work's kicked off on that. So there will be clearer definition on that. I did see some comments that education drive skills. I can't really see skills going away, because though there's some work about work ontologies and task ontologies, I think they would be even far more difficult to manage inside the context of an organisation, and where you can pick that data up, because even if you're inferring that, it tends to be that they've got to be working in tech systems, and it cuts a massive swathe of the workforce out. And that's similar to what Microsoft's skills are doing. So that's available. So if you are looking at some tech, if you've got, depending on what your license of Copilot is, Microsoft have just released their people skills, but there aren't any integrations yet with things like Workday. And the other downside of that, I would say, is there aren't proficiency levels in there. They think they're not needed. So when I was on their webinar, they were getting a lot of flack off practitioners saying, well, yes, we do. We do need proficiency levels. So they're now looking at a use case to add those in. There is also the open skills announcement that's recently been made by, I think, 4 or 5 vendors, and I've given you the link to that as well. So that's Visier, who are a people analytics company. They do strategic workforce planning, etc. It's Fuel 50, who are a career development platform, talent marketplace. It is TechWolf, who do what looks like, it's like a skill aggregation model. So it sits across the top. And there's Lightcast, who I mentioned. I think there's one other vendor in that, but that gives you the PR that's recently come out. It came out at Learning Tech about that partnership. So that should start to hopefully make that interoperability less of a headache. But I know with the clients that I work with, that's one of the biggest ones.
That makes sense. And it's funny how the same problems reintroduce themselves as we change how we work and what we're doing. We had the same interoperability issue just with basic content sort of 20 odd years ago. Unfortunately, the solution we came up with 20 years ago we're still clinging to, but let's not dig into that one today. So shall we move on to the framework?
Let's move on. There's the sphere definition there, which you'll find on their website, which we've shared. They talk about the difference between knowledge, skills, and competencies, which could be interchangeable with capabilities. But it just shows you the different definitions that are available, which causes all confusion. So make it make sense for you would be my message at the end of the day on that.
I think that's kind of what I was getting at with that thing before. I think the most important thing is that within your organization, within your team, you're all speaking the same language. Yes. Because I think it's probably optimistic that the entire industry is going to come together and go, this is the thing. I don't think we've managed it for anything yet. So we're not even all convinced we should be called learning and development. So if we're not sure on that, it's probably a bit much to define anything else.
Yeah, it is.
So we kind of touched on this already.
Yeah, I'm ahead of myself a bit. So yeah, what is a skill is described there. There's probably a couple of others that I didn't touch on. It's the definable bit is there as well. Is what's your definition of it? But largely, if you've got those attributes, it helps you design a skill. And I think I might have provided an example as well that was used in a prototype I did. I think that might be there in the slide deck as well, isn't it? Yeah, there's one. So it's like, well, this is one that's important to, it is leadership. I'm giving it, starting to look at governance here as well. And that's a really important point when you're prototyping, is start to look at how you're going to govern this. You're not going to be able to build it and then just leave it. So who's going to have ownership of it? How's that going to get updated? What's the cadence? What is it you're going to update and why? What's the driver? What's the trigger to update it? Not just updating for updating's sake. So starting to categorize skills, look at what's generic. I use a portfolio management lens of skills. So what is very specific to your organization? And this goes back to your question around using the tech and using taxonomies, etc., that are off the shelf. If it's pretty generic, and it might be things, leadership tends to be an area that is pretty generic, but there might be odd things that are really relevant to your strategy and the way and your culture that you might want to then add in to that cluster. And this is an example of how you could start to prototype a skill and make that relevant for your organization and co-create that definition as part of your prototyping.
Perfect. So in our first 30 days, just 30 days, not even 90, 30 days, we have got the green flag, engaged our stakeholders, defined our prototype skills, and hopefully within that have our competency levels and things like that. Now we go straight into the next 30 days, days 31 to 60.
Yes.
what are we looking to do inside our second batch of 30 days? What's our kind of headline goal?
Testing this out. So go back to your use case again. I think I've given a template, an example use case in here as well. I don't know where that one is. Sorry, whatever order it's in. That's my navigator. That just shows you how complicated this thing is. So there you are. There's a use case discovery board. So you could go back to this, look at what your use case is, and look at what processes you might want to test that in. And in this example, it's a mobility process, which was a massive headache for the organization. Everybody hated the process. It caused annual problems. Nobody knew what anybody could do. People were scattered all over the world, and they didn't have a clue about what skills people had got. And they were making very subjective decisions rather. Is that the right word? I'm getting mixed up with my words today. They weren't making data informed decisions, put it that way. And that was our main use case here, and building the skills around that, and then testing it out within that, mapping that process out and testing it with end users who had been involved in scoping out what the skills ought to be for their roles, because they're doing the work.
So I'm always fascinated when we test things within organizations, because I think there's this, certainly I talk a lot about, there's this fear around experimentation, where in fact, of course, experimentation aims to reduce risk and increase certainty incrementally, all these positive things that we say. But practically, when you've got this prototype, how do you go to the business and say, hey, some of this is probably wrong, but we want to implement it on whatever way and test it and find out what's wrong and fix it as we go? How do you go about having that conversation? Because I know that can be tough for a lot of people and within a lot of organizations.
Well, you're minimizing risk, because if you wait and then roll it out later, I keep using this phrase just lately, you pay now or you pay later greater. So learning as you go, and finding someone that will work in that way. So there's no point in trying to twist someone's arm and that doesn't want to work in that way. So that goes back to your upfront conversation when you start to say, I've got this 30% idea. This is how I imagine it would work. We'll need to test it. We'll need to do. Are you up for that? Is getting that buy-in for that as well really early on. Because if you get to this point, you've done all that groundwork, and then they don't want to learn from the use case, then you're already on a downhill slope, unfortunately. And doing that pre-mortem up front would help to solve some of that too, because if you can foresee what potential roadblocks, problems might be ahead, and already start to mitigate those, and there's a section there on risks, and you could delve into that more deeply for pre-mortem as well, how you're going to mitigate those risks.
Absolutely. And if anyone's got any thoughts or questions about implementing any of this in their own organizations, please do jump into the chat, because we want you to be able to go away and take this 90 days and maybe replicate it for yourself. So pardon me a moment.
Yeah, that sort of high level pre-tech. What's all the steps? That might not be the steps for you. This was the steps in this particular situation. So again, it's purely context driven. So I'm giving you some ideas and examples here, but don't take these as set in stone, because I'm working in a completely different organization now, and the process we're looking at is totally different to that. And I've learned as I've gone as well. That's the other thing. So I'm iterating the way that I go about this with what I learned from what I've done before. That's really important. I'm learning about this all the time as I'm going as well.
Absolutely. And I think this is kind of the last thing before we actually jump ahead. Our middle 30 days seem like they're much lighter, but I think the challenge is what they have in them is test it. Does it work? Put it into action, which is kind of quick to say, but I think we all kind of know quite challenging to do. So kind of what's the last things we need to cover within the second lot of 30 days, day 31 to 60, to make sure we're testing and getting what we need out of that testing?
Yeah, so you've got those metrics up front in your use case. So you're always going back to your use case. It's a canvas. You might be updating it. You might be changing it. You might be iterating that as well based on what you're finding out. So you're doing things like surveys. You might want to use your social media in a channel or a team that you're testing this out, and you might pull together a social channel group that's just for this project. So it keeps it quite tight, and you're always asking the questions and testing that out and gathering the data. It might be then focus groups, some surveys, but use social channels where you can, and keep the conversation active about whatever it is that you've chosen to work on. But initially it's quite tough within that time, if you can get to having a breakdown as, okay, these are our jobs that are really critical, these are the job families, it depends on how broad you're going, these are the roles that are really critical, they're competencies that we have at the moment, actually this is the skills. So you're looking at that movement, if you've got competency models, from the competencies to the skills, and you're giving them a breakdown of those critical roles and critical skills that you've identified, and sense checking that with them as well before you move to that next stage in validation. But if you do get time to test some of that in a process as well, great for you, but I think it would be quite tough to maybe achieve that also in that second 30 days.
So yeah, I think in that sense, like with all things, you have to be somewhat forgiving to yourself and to the process while doing this kind of work. You are never going to achieve everything. So you kind of, one, have to set realistic expectations, and two, part of experimentation is discovering you are fundamentally wrong and probably need to start again. Hopefully not too often, and hopefully not about everything, but occasionally. I mean, it happened to me the other week where we thought, oh, this could be a potential solution to this problem. Nope, definitely not. Within about 20 minutes of our first conversation, it was painfully clear this was the wrong direction. So that willingness to just row back, I think, is so important. I want to make sure we get into our last 30 days, because we've also got some questions coming in about implementation. So do you want to walk us through what, once we've done that validation, that testing, what does our last 30 days, our 61 to 90, look like?
You start to think about what's going to be next. What do you want to do next? What changes are you going to make to what you've already done? What's the feedback telling you? And also, where can you scale it? Where can you start to scale this up? Where can you test it out? Who else would want to do it? But also, what would be the next step on this particular use case as well? What do you want to do next with it?
I think that's really important, because I think we sometimes get to the end of these processes and expect to be left with this one thing. The fix, the solution, rather than getting to the end and going, what have you got? A big pile of questions and what ifs, and being kind of comfortable with that things are better than they were, but not yet perfect, maybe.
Yeah, it is messy. It is really messy. And you'd start to think about, well, what else might need to change in the system? Do we need to change our organizational design and our architecture? And that's potentially, really impacted by artificial intelligence. That's one of the big areas. There's some really great tech I'm starting to see now in the org design world, where there's a digital twin created of your organization, and you can then start to look at, well, what impacts would AI have on particular roles? Where might they be augmented? And what does that mean for your structure? So you'd start to maybe go even deeper into your system more broadly with what you're learning from a particular use case, depending on what you've chosen. But ideal use cases would be where you've got less change effort and you're starting with something from scratch. So it might be a new product, it might be a new team, it might be a new division. And that's where you can learn more, because you're doing it from the ground up to replicate it elsewhere.
Fantastic. Now we've got some, I think, really good questions that have come in, which I think can round some of this off for us. The first one kind of links back to one of the things I said right at the start, which is, what are a couple of quick wins we can aim for in the first 90 days to build credibility and momentum whilst rolling out skills strategy?
Oh, quick wins would be you're giving them some data that they didn't have before on their people, because if you don't know what people can or can't do, and how can you plan? So you're going to be able to start to surface that in your first 90 days and start to develop a language as well. You because this is how you start to embed this in your conversations. It might throw up, oh, we don't actually have these conversations. That's a massive learning for us. We don't talk about this kind of data in our business planning, in our meetings. Strategic workforce planning is often poorly done. A lot of the research out there shows that. So that might be some of the quick wins. It's like aha moments. Okay, we don't know this.
That makes sense. And we got a whole bunch of sort of ahead of time questions. The first one, which it was interesting, I thought. My business is largely focused on compliance training. Yeah. It is very difficult to persuade them to do anything that is not directly aligned to meeting our compliance obligations. How do I go about promoting a skills first or skills based approach when the focus is fixed on compliance?
That tends to be probably an easier use case. I've seen that in some of the organisations that I've worked in because the regulators want that data. So that's normally an easier sell, and probably going back as well to what the regulator requirements are, because often we can misinterpret them. It's like, simple words like could. So that assessment data could be like this, where it's then more open to your own interpretation. That and CPD, as you mentioned earlier, is so important in a lot of these spaces, that having that data and observable data and validated data on the CPD, purely then it's a tick box exercise, that CPD is done. It would be on probably the validation and assessments that you'd have a really quick win and a use case.
I wonder if maybe the perceived challenge goes back to what we said at the start, where we said about people tend to think of data as proving the value of what we've done, rather than looking at the organization to understand it better. Maybe if that's how we're thinking about data, we're not necessarily attaching that to skills at that early stage.
Yeah, and you talked about what we've done as well. There's also where you can start to think about, well, what's going to be the leading data, not purely the lagging data, as you start to get more mature with those insights as well. And again, if you've got a lot of that compliance regulation data, then you've got a lot that you can start to use, and it might make it more interesting for the end users as well in their experience, because you're looking at the employee experience, which I haven't touched on much at all, really. I did at the beginning, but that's really, really critically important. So where are you removing friction is really important in that use case, and where are you making working lives easier for employees and managers? So rather than adding something in, what can you remove and take away and replace with something better would be quick wins here, as well as you start to map out your workflows and your use cases, because you don't want to be adding more things in for people to do. It might feel like that a little bit at the beginning, where you've got a crossover, but that also goes to things like your tech stack as you get more broadly with adoption. You don't want to be duplicating the tech that you've got, and similarly, you don't want to duplicate processes.
Brilliant. The next one's a little bit of a loaded question, but I quite like the honesty behind it. Isn't all this skilled stuff just another buzzword to sell stuff? We've all got skills. We get them anyway. Do we really need to be trained on them?
Not purely only trained on them. It's insights about, well, what can you do if you want opportunities? It's a bit like blowing your own trumpet and getting the data and the insights. You might say that about LinkedIn endorsements. Are they really worth anything? Are they that valuable? Here you're looking at you're not looking at all data, which I mentioned earlier. You might have the opportunity to do that, or the resources to do it, and some organizations do. You're looking at critical things that affect your P&L, your performance, might affect like regulators, whether or not you're going to maintain a contract or not, because you haven't got the skills and capabilities to deliver on a contract you've won. It starts to go through that commercial lens. But I do agree that the SBO, the skills powered organization, whatever it is, has been sold as something that is what the organization is, and it's not. It's a small part. And I think you posted something really intriguing this week on LinkedIn, which I commented on, around competencies, and I put a screenshot in there of some research that a group I'm in look at evidence-based practice, where just purely for the individual to perform, there are 124 plus factors, and skills are only one small part of that. So skills-based organization is, I totally agree with the person that's made the comment. It's what people know of, they know it as, but I really don't like that label. And for a counter argument on all of this as well, I think another good read up front is Mark Efron's paper, Is the Juice Worth the Squeeze? But I'd also add a caveat onto that, that I do say, yeah, it's worth the squeeze if you can remove the pith. Is what are you doing, Annie? What are you doing otherwise? So if you're not doing this in this way, what else are you doing? Why is it better? And how is it shining a light on the work that L&D do? Because I think that's something as well around this, is it can feel quite exciting, but I mentioned it on a podcast a few weeks ago. It's really exposing because it starts to open up where and how is L&D building capability?
Yeah.
Where are you spending your resources? And I start to talk as well about how learning and development then needs to operate quite differently in this way, more as a product manager, managing learning products, experiences, not about skills and tagged and pathways, but where are your gaps and where are you retiring skills, where you're retiring learning, and managing your learning and your skills roadmap far more through a product lens.
Absolutely. I have dropped a bunch of links into the chat to resources that Teresa has very graciously provided us. There is a wealth of content out there. As we've kind of touched on, these are sources you can go to get a perspective, a resource. But we would always stress, go to all of them because they are varied, because in some ways, some will align brilliantly with each other and some will go, actually. And it's that friction that you get between different sources, between different perspectives, between different contexts that will allow you to forge something that's going to work in your organization. This is exactly why today was not just one session. This was 3 very different sessions with very different focuses, very different perspectives. I am, however, in the position of needing to draw this all to a bit of a close. So what I would like to finish off with, Teresa, could you share with us kind of your, if people were to walk away from this session with just one takeaway, scrap the rest, I'm only going to remember one thing, what would you want everyone here to walk away thinking about or planning to do next?
I only do it if it's going to add value. Don't do it because everyone else is doing it. There's a book that I've been reading called Uncommon Sense, Common Nonsense. That's the title of it. Yeah. So just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean that you should do it. You might want to do just parts of it and certain elements of your organization because it makes sense. And that part of the organization lends itself well to this type of thinking, working, gathering that data. You might not want to do it in all parts. So I don't think it's just a big shebang and you've got to do it everywhere. Yeah. Choose value.
Love that. Teresa, thank you so much for your time and your expertise today. I will drop into the chat now Teresa's LinkedIn. Please do connect, as I've said, bombard with questions, obviously. But no, more importantly, the people that we've had with us today are all experts in this field. They share valuable things with us all, and they do so incredibly freely. So thank you so much for your time and the value you shared with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for everyone's engagement and questions.
Lovely. It's been a pleasure. And so we now hurtle towards the closing of the day and the promise of dinner or lunch or whatever next meal is suitable for you wherever you are today. Thank you so much for joining us, whether you've just joined us for the last 10 minutes or whether you've been here with us all afternoon. I really hope that your brain is alight with ideas and possibilities, not just that you're going to go and do what you've been told to go and do, but that you might be able to come up with some something new that's perfect for your organization, that addresses the challenges that you and your people face. A few really quick things from me before we go. The first is, if you are interested to learn more about Thirst, who have been the organizer of this event, they've put it all on and made it all possible. You can scan this QR code for you, and you can book a personalized one-to-one session with Fred, where he'll walk you through what the platform does, what's possible. And that's true whether you want to deep dive into how AI can support skill strategy, or just want to see what a truly customizable learning platform looks like in action. The spots are limited, so if you are interested in that, I would encourage you to scan that QR code now before the end of the session. Obviously, you'll have access to the recording straight away afterwards, so if you miss it now, you can always quickly rewind and come back to it. You will also be getting, in the very, very near future, an ebook covering the insights from today. In the next couple of weeks, the Thirst team are going to be rapidly working away in the background, bringing everything from this recording together to offer that to you in written format. What we would like you to do, though, as a contribution, is to share your biggest takeaway. Drop it into the comments. What are you walking away thinking about? What will you do that's different? What would you like to see at the next L&D Unleashed? Because, of course, this is the very first one. And as with all L&D initiatives, feedback is the lifeblood of iteration. And we would love to get your input moving forwards. What topics do you want to see us discuss? How would you like to see them discussed? Was this too long, too short? Perhaps you'd like to see it become a 3-day spectacular, or perhaps you'd like us to shorten it all to half an hour and shut up and get off the stage. I know where my money is on that stance, but I would love to hear what you think. Whilst you're doing that, though, a quick request from me. It is lovely to spend time with you. Of course it is. It's great that we're here absorbing these ideas, sharing our thoughts. But events like this, and webinars and podcasts and YouTube videos and anything else we do and watch are only valuable when we take the time to reflect on them and then put them into practice. Knowing stuff about skills that you didn't know this morning is wonderful, but doesn't change anything. So, if at all possible, when you come off this session, just take 5 minutes. Take 5 minutes to stop and think about everything you've just heard or seen or watched, and ask yourself what you're going to do with that. What is this going to enable you to do in the real world that has impact for you, your organization, and the people within it? Because that's the point of these sessions, to help you do stuff, not just know stuff. And with all of that said, it really has been a pleasure to be with you for this very first L&D Unleashed. We hope to see you again at future events. We are taking a break in this series of monthly sessions in August, because it's August, and let's be honest, none of us want to be inside watching a webinar in August. We want to be outside in the sun, as we have in Britain, or sun, as you might have in other countries. But until we return, thank you so much for your time, and we will see you again very, very soon.